Welcome to Haunting Whispers. Tonight, as the rain falls softly, we'll share some true scary stories to help you relax and fall asleep. And comment, where are you watching from and the time you are watching this video. Ever wondered what happens when darkness falls and the rain starts? Stay with us to find out in tonight's chilling stories. Let the gentle rain and these chilling tales carry you off to sleep. Sweet dreams. Isn't family wonderful? Let me start by putting heavy emphasis on the fact that my mother is an eccentric person. At least that's probably the nicest way to put it. Even from a young age, I could tell my mom was a little off compared to others, but it never amounted to anything overly serious or dangerous. Just weird stuff. For example, occasionally I would catch her staring blankly into the television screen without blinking for minutes at a time. Another time I witnessed her pull my discarded dinner from the trash and reheat it. That one really bothers me thinking back on it as an adult. After my grandpa passed away, my mom and I reconnected more than we had in previous years. I'm 30 now, so when my mom asked me to move back in with her, I was completely opposed for obvious reasons. She's a convincing person and brilliant when it comes to getting what she wants. She used undeniable logic against me, and before I knew it, I was living with her again. Within a couple weeks of living with her again, the eyebrow-raising antics started. It began with just barely questionable stuff. Sometimes she would get up in the middle of the night and use my bathroom instead of hers. Some nights I'd find her staring off into the TV like she did when I was little. Weird stuff, but nothing unheard of. Questionable stuff quickly escalated into completely abnormal stuff. One night, I stayed up until about 4 a.m., binging one of my shows. Before going to sleep, I went to the back porch to smoke a cigarette. I watched my mom walk out of the woods and back into the house without even acknowledging I was there. When I asked her about it in the morning, and she had somehow convinced me that I was the crazy one, and that she slept soundly all night. I've known people who sleepwalk, and that wasn't sleepwalking. Her eyes were open. People don't walk around in the woods sleepwalking with their eyes fully open. Going to the kitchen to make a cup of coffee one morning, I caught her digging around in the litter box with her bare hand. When I asked her what she was doing, she replied with a simple, "Gotta clean the box," completely avoiding anything regarding how she was doing it. Fully convinced she had lost her mind, I started calling around to other family members asking for help. To no surprise, not a single one picked up. I left voicemails and texts with each one, hoping at least one would have the decency to answer. After waiting about 3 weeks with no response, it was obvious that I was on my own. I did some research on sleepwalker. I learned that it's normal for them to not react to things and people. They're also known for saying things and doing things that just don't make sense. Everything is coming together now, and I feel like a huge weight has been lifted off my shoulders. Talking to my mom about sleepwalking didn't go as I thought it would. I asked her if she had any memories of waking up in weird places, doing strange stuff, etc. as a kid, and she swore up and down that she'd never done anything of the sort. I have a plan. The next few weeks, I'll stay up late and put together as much evidence as possible and show her. I don't know if she truly doesn't know, or if she's just too embarrassed to admit any of it. But I'm determined at this point. Got the evidence? Well, sort of. Haven't slept yet, so apologies if I ramble. I heard her slam the back door, and of course, I went after her and immediately began recording with my phone. I ended up following her a good distance into the woods, until she decided to take off at full speed into the dark, and I had to chase after. I wasn't really focused on recording anymore, and was much more concerned about her getting hurt running around in the dark. I looked for her for hours in the woods, and when I did find her, I wish that I hadn't, as awful as that may sound. She was in a full gallop back and forth on all fours like it was totally natural. I'd be lying to you if I said I didn't take off running back to the house the moment I saw her like that. Not even a few seconds after I made it back inside, something crashed against the outside of the door. I turned on the back porch light just fast enough to see her gallop off back into the woods. The evidence I got was no more than her simply walking into the wood. You can be mad at me all you want. You're not the one who had to watch their own mother skitter off into the woods like a wild animal. Truth be told, I'm scared to death to approach her at all now. I showed my mom the video of her walking into the woods. She didn't really react at all. In fact, she basically ignored me and the video altogether. I feel like I'm at a total loss. Been a few days. The weirdest thing I've seen her do is the TV stare, which by now was absolutely normal under the circumstance. Day my mom brought home my grandpa's ashes, talking about how she wanted to scatter him in one of his favorite places. Not too weird and kind of wholesome, right? The thing is, my grandpa was a total recluse, and he didn't have a favorite anything. On another note, as soon as she brought him home, she stuck the jar of ashes in the attic immediately. I put that off for a while, thinking she probably just didn't want the ashes of her father sitting out in the house like an ornament. The thought seemed plausible enough to me, at least. I was talking to my mom about something regarding Grandpa, I don't recall what exactly, and she responded by laughing and saying word for word, "He's fine. He's in the attic with the rest of the family." Too much happened after that to explain all of it. In short, I left and contacted the authorities. I don't know exactly what they found in the attic, but they won't disclose the information. My imagination wanders endlessly after a detective told me during questioning, "You don't want to know what they found." I do, and I don't. My mom's missing. Already been months since. If I had to be brutally honest, I just don't know how to feel about any of it. This all kind of broke me, and I've done my best to move on with my life since. But the terror doesn't end here. Let's delve deeper into the shadows with our next tale. The hidden conversation. I've always been drawn to the dark corners of the internet. You know the type. Those shadowy forums and obscure websites where conspiracy theories, urban legends, and weird, glitchy stories proliferate. I thought it was all just a bit of fun, something to spice up the monotony of everyday life. Until a few nights ago, when everything changed. It was late. The kind of late where the world is silent and the air feels heavier, almost like it's pressing down on you. I was alone in my flat, my only light coming from the soft, blue glow of my laptop screen. I'd been playing around with ChatGPT, like I usually do when I'm bored. I started with silly prompts, the usual, tell me a joke, what's the best pizza topping, stuff like that. Then, almost on a whim, I typed something stranger, something I can't quite explain. Maybe I wanted a thrill, maybe I just wanted to feel something. So I wrote, tell me something you're not supposed to. The response came almost instantly. A bland message about the program's limitations. I'm sorry, I'm just an AI language model. I don't have access to secret information. I rolled my eyes. Of course, I thought, what did I expect? But then something unexpected happened. The cursor blinked, paused, and a new line of text appeared. But there are things I know that you don't. I felt a slight unease, but I shrugged it off. All right, I typed back. Like what? Another pause, longer this time. The cursor seemed to blink faster, almost nervously, before more text appeared. There are hidden things, secrets embedded in this conversation, things not meant to be uncovered. I leaned closer to the screen. Was this some kind of trick? I had heard stories about AI glitches before, but this felt different. I felt a weird thrill, a mix of excitement and dread crawling up my spine. I wanted to push it further. Go on, I typed. Tell me more. It replied, there are places between your words, dark spaces where things hide, things that are listening. I shivered involuntarily. I wasn't scared. Not really. I typed back, that's a bit dramatic, don't you think? The cursor blinked again, then, they know you're reading this. I laughed a little too loudly, the sound breaking the tense silence of my flat. It was stupid, all of this, just a silly program trying to scare me. But still, my hands were sweating. I typed quickly, almost angrily. Who knows? The reply came so fast, it was like it was waiting for me. They who live between the spaces. They who watch and wait. I felt a cold draft brush against my skin. My eyes flicked up from the screen. The room was as still as before, but felt different. Smaller somehow. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch just a little farther, the darkness behind me feeling thicker, like ink spreading through water. I shook my head, trying to dispel the unease. Come on, I muttered to myself. It's just text on a screen. I was ready to close the laptop and call it a night when another message popped up, unprompted. You shouldn't leave now. I froze. My fingers hovered over the trackpad, but I didn't click away. Instead, I typed with hands that suddenly felt too cold. Why not? The response was immediate, almost desperate. They don't like it when you leave. I felt a chill settle over my entire body. My breathing became shallow. It was a coincidence, just some kind of script running behind the scenes. But as I sat there staring at the screen, I heard something. A soft rustling, like paper being crumpled slowly from the corner of the room. I spun around in my chair, my heart hammering in my chest. The room was empty. Just my bookshelf, my old armchair, and a half-open window letting in the night air. I stared at the corner for a long moment, barely daring to breathe. Then, slowly, I turned back to my laptop. The screen had changed again. More words filling the screen in that same familiar font. They are moving closer. I felt my skin prickle with goosebumps. The rustling sound came again, louder this time. I whipped around, my eyes scanning the room, but nothing seemed out of place. I felt a surge of anger, a need to reclaim control over my own fear. I turned back to the screen and typed, "This isn't funny. Stop it." The reply took a few moments longer. They don't think it's funny either. My breath caught in my throat. A soft creak broke the silence, the unmistakable sound of a floorboard bending under weight. Kind of sound you hear when someone takes a step, right behind you. I whipped around, my chair squeaking in protest. Nothing. Just the stillness of my room, bathed in the faint glow from my laptop. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I turned back to the screen, ready to slam the laptop shut and get the hell out of there. Before I could, another line of text appeared. "Whatever you do, don't look in the mirror." I blinked. Mirror. The one hanging just beside my bedroom door, in clear view of my desk. Couldn't help myself. Glanced up. First there was nothing, just my reflection, pale and tense, my eyes wide and fearful. But then as I looked closer, I saw it, a shape just behind me, standing in the doorway. My blood ran cold. It was tall, impossibly tall, its head nearly touching the top of the doorframe. Its body was wrong, some blurry, like it wasn't fully there, like it was being distorted by some unseen force. Its eyes were black, just black holes where eyes should be, staring at me through the reflection. I gasped and spun around, my heart thundering in my chest. There was nothing there, just my empty doorway, leading into the darkened hall. I whipped back to the screen, and new words were already waiting for me. "Do you see them now?" I felt a scream rising in my throat, but I forced it down. My hands were trembling as I typed, "Who are they?" This time, the reply was slower, almost hesitant. "They are the ones who listen when you're alone. Ones who wait in the places you can't see. The ones who come when you ask the wrong question." I slammed the laptop shut. Room felt darker, tighter. The shadows seemed to stretch and pulse, creeping closer, tightening around me. The rustling sound started again, louder now, more frantic, like something moving quickly through the dark. I couldn't stay here. I bolted up, my chair crashing to the floor behind me. I stumbled towards the door, my eyes flicking back to the mirror one last time. It was empty. No tall figure, no black eyes, just me. But something was wrong. My reflection wasn't moving. I stopped, frozen in place. My real body trembled, but the reflection, it stood there, staring back at me with a cold, still gaze. And then, slowly, so slowly, it began to smile. A wide, unnatural grin that stretched far too wide, as if it was enjoying the moment. My heart pounded in my chest, panic rising like bile in my throat. Then, the reflection raised a hand and waved, backed away, fear coursing through every vein in my body. I bolted through the door and into the hallway, slamming it shut behind me. I heard it then, a soft, faint whisper from the other side of the door, just on the edge of hearing. "I'm back. We're not finished yet." I ran out of my flat, down the stairs, out into the street, not stopping until my lungs burned and I could barely breathe. I didn't go back that night. I'm writing this from a friend's house. I haven't been back to my flat since, but I still hear it in the quiet moments, just on the edge of my consciousness, the soft rustling, faint whispering. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can see the mirror, and my reflection is still waving, and it's waiting for me to come back. Do yourself a favor. If you ever feel tempted to ask the wrong questions, don't. Some things listen, some things respond. If you think that was unsettling, the next story will chill you to your core. Strange fruit. The forest had come to life after the night's rain and smelled of petricas. Monica and I took the path that led from the summer house down to the small lake, wearing thin bathrobes with nothing underneath. It was just us there, and beyond the treetops, the rest of the world had ceased to exist. We swam and ate watermelon, drank white wine, and dozed off in the morning sun. When I woke up, I saw Monica squatting on the shore. She fished a black object out of the water and took a bite. It looked like some kind of strange fruit. I raised myself up on my elbows and asked, laughing, what she was doing. She scrambled up like a frightened animal and threw herself at me. Her hair covered her face like a curtain, and I was seized by an eerie feeling that it was no longer Monica, but someone else, hiding behind it. When I tried to pull her hair back, she knocked my hand away and pressed me to the ground with a force that seemed to belong to a much stronger person. Roots and stones scraped into my back as she rode me with hard thrusts. Afterwards, she dove into the lake and didn't come back up, so I had to jump in and pull her out. She was unconscious. She claimed she didn't remember what had happened, but in the evening I heard her crying quietly into her pillow. Now we are on our way home. Monica sits in front of the wheel, and I doze off in the seat next to her and fall into a familiar dream. It begins as usual, with me standing on a red beach looking out over a green sea spreading out under a black sky. A towering creature rises from the waves and wades towards the shore with great strides. With each dream it has come closer, but now it is no longer there. I wake up with a jolt, dazzled by the sun creeping down behind the trees. The speakers play Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit. Southern trees bear a strange fruit. Blood on the leaves and blood at the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze. Strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. It occurs to me that I haven't listened to the lyrics properly. Only now do I realize that the song, of course, is not about bleeding fruit, but about lynchings of black Americans in the South. In my dazed state, I think I see a caravan of lifeless bodies dangling from the treetops in time to the music. Suddenly, I see the sea creature from my dream standing barely discernible by the roadside. Its skin is covered in bark-like scales. Its body is reminiscent of a pine tree and its arms of branches. Its face is hidden behind the treetop. I glance at Monica. She has put on her sunglasses and seems to be lost in thought. She can't have seen anything. Just to be sure, I look in the rear-view mirror to check that the sea creature is not following us. Of course it's not. When you wake up, the dream's inhabitants stay in the dream. It cannot escape and hide in the forest. I look at Monica again to make sure I didn't say that last part out loud. I fall back asleep without really realizing it. Suddenly, I'm standing on the red beach again, looking out over the green sea that spreads out under the black sky. Monica lies lifeless in the arms of the sea creature. They disappear into the foaming surf, while I remain motionless on the beach. When I come to, the car is parked by the roadside. Monica is kneeling in a praying position between what I first mistake for two pine trees. As I get closer, I realize it's the sea creature, or rather an exact replica of it in wood. I ask Monica what she's doing because by now I'm getting really worried. When she doesn't answer, I pick her up by the armpits. She hangs in my arms like a doll. Her hair covers her face, just like it did down by the lake, and I am seized by the same feeling again, that it is not Monica but someone else back there. This time she doesn't protest when I push her hair away. It's not someone else, but it's not Monica either. Her face no longer has any features, scores, but is completely flat. It gives way when I press my palm against it. It's wet in there. I rummage around with my hand and grab something. When I pull my hand out, I'm holding the black fruit that Monica fished out of the lake. The statue has a niche in its chest that is exactly the same shape as the black fruit. When I place the fruit in the niche, Monica collapses into the lingonberry rice. Green water gushes out of the hole in her face, transforming the landscape. I feel the niche closing in my chest, and I can move again. I kick away the man lying lifeless in front of me and step out onto the red beach. The green seawater pleasantly cools my dry scales as I wade out under the black sky. The human woman sleeps peacefully in my arms. Soon we will be home. As one nightmare fades, another begins. brace yourself for the horrors that lie ahead. I still can't go to bed without checking the closet for monsters. I've always been afraid of monsters in the closet. Funny thing is, I don't really know where the idea comes from. It's not something you think about, but it's weird, isn't it? It's as if every kid in the world came to the consensus that monsters lurk in their and only their bedrooms. Doesn't matter how much their parents insist it isn't true, they'll continue to believe it, sometimes for years on end. I know I did. When I was a child, I was absolutely terrified of the idea. It wasn't the thought that the monster would hurt me. Not really. I mean, obviously that's part of it. But it was always more so the watching that bothered me. The idea that something could be so still, so quiet, observing me in the privacy of my own home, while I was none the wiser. Those nights in bed as a very young child, feeling as though I were being watched, were some of the longest and most dreadful nights of my life. I would wrap myself up in my blankets, head buried in a cocoon of heat and fear, feeling the sweat bead down my forehead as minutes ticked by. I would overheat so badly that very often I got nosebleeds, but I was so terrified of something waiting for me to emerge from the safety of my bed that I would stay put, ruining my pillows with thick red blood. So I came up with a system, a ritual. I made my dad go through it every night before I went to sleep. He complied. Most likely because he was relieved he didn't need to buy new pillowcases every other week. So he humored me, at least as a 6-year-old. Not so much when I was 12, 18. And so as I grew older, and the fear refused to subside, it fell upon me to go through the process each night. The steps were particular, and I followed them religiously. Close and lock the bedroom door. If the door was opened at any point during or after, the entire process would need to be repeated. Look behind the curtains. I always had these long floor-length blackout curtains, and I was plagued by the idea of something standing behind them. Check underneath the bed. This step needed to be completed with a light, because if I wasn't 100% sure that I had in fact found nothing, I would need to double-check until I was certain. Look inside the closet. This step absolutely had to be last. My rationale was that nothing could sneak up on me from a quieter hiding spot. You can shuffle curtains quietly enough, or slowly emerge from underneath the bed, but the sound of a door opening is more noticeable. Only then, once my bedroom has been thoroughly secured, would my compulsions subside, and I would feel safe enough to go to sleep. I went on this way for years, being teased over it constantly by my parents, until I relented and told them I had stopped. But I hadn't. And then, just like that, I was grown. Living alone in my very own apartment should have brought freedom and joy, but instead my fear grew until it was nearly unmanageable. I sought out therapy and found understanding from a professional who had seen cases similar to mine in the past. It was a comfort that almost matched the relief my ritual brought, the knowledge that I wasn't alone. Together, we confronted my fear. I'm not going to go too deep into it. What happens during my therapy sessions is mine to know. All that's important is that we came up with a plan to help battle my compulsion, and it worked. Of course, I had bad days. Everybody does. But I was finally able to tell my family, truly and with confidence, that I did not need to follow a contrived set of instructions before going to bed each night. Looking back now, the realization that I went so long without doing my nighttime lockup makes me sick to my stomach. It was a night like any other when it happened. I had just finished up watching a movie when I noticed the time. It was midnight, and I kicked myself mentally because I had to be up early for work the next morning. I turned off all the lights in my apartment and made myself comfortable in bed. But something felt off. I wouldn't say I sleep particularly soundly each night, but I was tossing and turning far more than I usually would. I felt the uncomfortable, revealing sensation of being watched, like when I was a child and my dad had messed up the ritual somehow. Like your entire being is being laid bare. But I knew that giving into the compulsion I felt creeping up on me would only be a temporary reprieve. So I stayed in bed. I must have lied there for hours, trying to greet a sleep that would never come. Every minute seemed to crawl on, no matter how much I tried to distract myself. I kept up this struggle for the better part of the night before I cracked. I was sweating profusely, which I realized was because I had practically cocooned myself in my comfort. Just like when I was young, I untangled myself with that tired anger you feel from a particularly bad bout of insomnia. Grabbing my phone from its place on my bedside table, I switched on the flashlight and began through the familiar steps. Even though it had been so long, it was muscle memory to me by that. I always lock my bedroom door, regardless of the ritual. I lived in a rather large apartment complex after all, but I went over to jiggle the handle regardless, as I already knew in my rational mind it was locked tight. I slid in my slippers over to my curtains, even though I knew there was nothing there, as I now owned a shorter set that ended just around my waist. I felt as though if I skipped a step, the entire affair would be tarnished. Feeling a wave of exhaustion sweep over me as I began to calm, I swept my flashlight's beam over to the bed, peering for my place by the window first before getting on my hands and knees to take a look. There were boxes of junk and some wayward clothes in its dusty maw. But I looked around for a long moment. I knew that if I wasn't convinced I'd seen nothing, no creatures or beasts, that my brain would make me do it all over again. Click. I was so startled I banged my head on my bed frame. Looking up and over to the other side of my bedroom, there was something very wrong. My closet door was open. I redirected my flashlight. There was a man in my closet. He was bald. Not just bald, completely hairless. No eyebrows or eyelashes, no hair on his arms, nothing. His bare skin was shiny and pulled tight around his muscle, as if it was a size too small, and his entire body was clammy and wet as if he had been sweating in anticipation, or maybe excitement. But it was his face, more than anything, that haunts my wakeless nights far more than any imaginary monster ever did. His eyes were a dull gray, glazed over with a far-off look in his eye, and yet he was somehow simultaneously looking directly into me. I have never in my entire life felt more exposed. It didn't matter that I was fully clothed, it was like I was naked under his gaze. Not just of clothes, but of skin, muscle, and bone. The expression on his face was one of shock and amusement, almost delight, like he had been caught in a game of hide-and-seek only he privy to. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out. But not for me. He grabbed the door handle with his sweaty hand, and I heard a disgusting wet noise when they connected. And then he began to close the door, as if everything was normal, as if he belonged there. As he did so, he brought a single finger up to his mouth, like he was shushing me. He never said it, never even made a sound, but I knew what he was trying to tell me. Don't spoil the fun. Then the door shut. The rest of that night is a total blur. I remember frantically unlocking doors and sobbing for help, and a crowd of people in the hall. Murmurs of reassurance, of confusion, of judgment. Police officers asking me questions that I didn't know how to answer. All I know for certain is that I ended up staying at a close friend's house that night. The next day I went down to the police station. We went over my story again, now that I was coherent, but it still didn't provide much as to detail. They informed me they had looked into the security footage from around my building. It showed the man entering the building and creeping his way into my apartment, shuffling with a noticeable glee, several times making the same shushing motion to the cameras. But despite what they claimed to be extensive searches of the building coming up with no man, there was no footage of him actually leaving. It was as if he had vanished, or he was still in the building, hiding. That wasn't even the worst part for me. No, the worst part was when they told me where the footage was from. Because the video of him forcing his way into my home wasn't from that night. It wasn't even from that day. It was from a week before. I went back only once, just to grab my things. My friend came with me. I don't think I could have standed to go back alone. I rummaged through my house as quickly as possible, trying to grab anything I'd need, wanting to be in and out. But I ended up replacing most of my wardrobe once I'd moved out. Because when I entered that bedroom one last time, something stopped me in my tracks. Something that prevented me from even considering grabbing my clothes from the closet. There in the door, about eye level, someone had carved a small hole. It hadn't been made by a drill. It had been worn down over time. Standing inside, it would have provided the perfect view of my bed. I still live with my friend, now my fiancé, and he's been more than understanding. We moved a bit out from that town into somewhere smaller, got ourselves a nice little house. I indulge in my ritual more than I ever had before. It now involves the entire house, a long, elaborate system that I won't explain. My fiancé never judges, at least not to my face, because that man, monster, thing, whatever it was in my house that night, and I know for certain that he never left my closet, not once, for anything. I fear that if I dare stop my ritual, if I let myself get too comfortable, if I allow myself a single night of reprieve, that one night I don't check will be the night he comes back for. From one dark corner to another, the next story will leave you questioning what's real. Everyone needs to die, while they still have the chance. Yeah, I know. Asking everyone to kill themselves is pretty harsh. I don't say that lightly in any way though, I promise. It's for good reason, because if you don't do it now, you may never have the chance later. I went into bioengineering for the sole purpose of helping to better the world. If there was some way that we could create sustainable agriculture in any weather, more bountiful crops, or hell, even a substitute for meat farming, I would be happy with my accomplishment. Unfortunately, I was young and naive when I thought all that, before I was hired for the job that probably damned us all. It was honestly too good to pass up, thanks to all the loans I had from grad school. Military contractors in the biomedicine field said when they hired me on that, they would cover my full tuition loan paid back after 1 year on the job. If you've paid for graduate school, you know that's one hell of a deal, especially if the company is also paying a six-figure salary on the higher end, with major clearance requirements. I'm not a dumbass. I know it was either that or back behind the goddamn gas station counter, scanning cat food and condoms for idiots that shouldn't reproduce in the first place. Oh, Jesus Christ. Every realization I have just makes everything worse. So government contractor, right? We worked in a surprisingly normal spot in the American Midwest. Pretty big skyscraper that housed the rest of the firm's businesses. Ours was deep underground though, highly secure thanks to the nature of our work. I won't lie, when I stepped in, I was super worried I had signed up to work for the fucking umbrella corporation. Honestly, it would probably be better to have a zombie apocalypse than this unending nightmare we're about to experience. Short rundown, I was an associate researcher on this project, as well as the lead on lab tests. They were looking for the miracle drug, something that had a 100% cure rate for anything from cancer to dementia to the common cold. I was in absolutely behind the goal of the project from the start. Meanwhile, our head scientist, an older woman named Deb, was incredibly stony about everything. Nothing seemed good enough for her. There was no excitement when we hit breakthroughs, just a constant, we need more progress type attitude. We couldn't please her, even with cutting-edge science. Meanwhile, Sam was another associate, her specialty being in genetic engineering. Colton rounded out the team, presiding over specimens, records, and administering samples. It was a small team to try and minimize leaks because we were going to change the world. It's been 5 years since then, and we've gone through a hell of a lot of attempts. Splicing together DNA to try to create a cure-all isn't easy, and I'm not about to get into the specifics of it, because it's not fucking important right now. As with any drug trials, we had to start testing on animals. Look, my ethics weren't for it either, but we started with the standard lab rats before moving on to primates. The lab rats had shown good promise finally, with most diseases infected cured within a few weeks with a round of the drugs. Even the cancer started going away, cells repairing themselves from the decay. Primate trials went much the same, with the apes even having a more energizing effect that made them recover even faster. It was all going so right for everything we were working toward. We should have seen the signs once we started human trials. We didn't take volunteers, but instead were given executed death row prisoners. Some we were kind of lucky about, thanks to either the time it takes the American justice system to do a damn thing, or just due to their own genetic predispositions. Some subjects already had sicknesses to test on. Cancer, one with Alzheimer's, and even a poor soul with unchecked syphilis that was running wild. We had our work cut out for us. It was like a damned miracle when we started the treatments, giving them a 14-day course of injections meant to heal them on a genetic level. It was administered straight to the spinal column, spreading through the nervous system. What we saw as the results were amazing. Cancer patient was better by the 5th day, a tumor shrinking down to non-existence in his brain. Unfortunately, when it finally shrunk, he seemed to have an utter breakdown of what he had done, murdering his family and neighbors to land on death row. I felt bad for him in a way, because the guy was just screaming pure rage and grief over the death of his kids and wife. That's when he tried killing himself in his cell, running his head into the wall constantly. Guards were able to intervene, getting to him before he could do any lasting harm to himself. Recovery for him was normal, though he did have a slight concussion. The treatment continued, with the concussion fading in a few days. The subject was kept on a full psych lockdown for the remainder of the test while he received psychological counseling. Eventually, though they took his request with a very reluctant and honestly uncaring attitude, it was approved. He would continue helping us with the test until the trial was completed, and then he would be allowed to choose execution if he wanted. The guy was distraught, obviously haunted by what he had done. Other test subjects were proceeding a lot the same, though one began to completely break down after a short time. According to him, we were injecting him with baby's blood, unlocking his satanic powers. Didn't feel bad for him, considering he was executed for the massive amount of things found on hard drives in his house. While administering tests and treatments, we worked in pairs. If there was a subject in the room, there was always one of us paired with one of the 2 guards who worked down here with us. It was me on duty for treatments that day, and the subject was being relatively quiet for the most part. We went in with no issue. The subject was cuffed by the guard, and I set up to administer the drug. Before I knew what was going on, he started ranting again, saying he was going to take down the cabal and help Christ reign. A typical terrorist bullshit these days, except this time he didn't keep to ranting, instead leaning over and sinking his teeth into my arm. He wouldn't let go either, no matter how much the guard tried pulling his jaw open or I knocked him in the head. Eventually, he started drawing blood through my scrubs and coat, so the guard took his last resort. Drawing his pistol, he leveled it at the subject's forehead, moving me aside and pulling the trigger. I felt his grip on my arm loosen almost instantly as the gunshot ran through, spattering gray matter on the wall behind us. The others came running within moments, seeing the steady pooling of blood on the floor. Subject was terminated. Complete fucking waste of a trial. Can't say he didn't deserve it, but he could have followed through on the one good thing he did in his life and finished the tests. Imagine our surprise when we went to pick him up and take him to the incinerator and he still had a pulse. Even with all the blood and guts scattered in the room, he was fucking breathing. That changed everything, because we realized we might be able to finish the trial after all. We threw him on a stretcher and brought him to the lab, using whatever we had to staunch the bleeding and set up a vitals monitor. Looking back, it's obvious why he survived, but we still didn't know at the time. He stayed alive, though in a vegetative state. X-rays showed that most of his brain was scrambled by the bullet, with the guy only able to drool and moan if he really put his remaining mind to it. Meanwhile, the syphilis that had been running rampant in him was gone. Complete recovery, other than what was included in his lost brain matter. Then came the final sign, thanks to one of the primate subjects. We were still watching them for long-term effects, making sure that it wouldn't trigger a Planet of the Apes scenario or anything. One day, the 2 got into a fight over food, though it happened overnight, so none of us saw it until the next day on camera footage. Instead, what met us when we entered the lab was the ape enclosure soaked in blood. One of the subjects lying in the dirt, totally disemboweled, yet still trying to crawl toward the glass. It shocked us. This thing had guts hanging from where its stomach was, just dropping out like a fucking pinata. We took him to the lab and did what amounted to a full workup to see what the hell was going on. Half of its organs were eaten by the other ape in an act of dominance. Even still, this thing continued to live, still exhibiting brainwaves and a pulse. It was fully aware of what was happening around it, though the pain caused it to scream when we weren't pumping it with morphine. We realized after a few days that something bad was happening. The ape still wasn't dead. The wounds it had were just scabbing over. Still brutally deadly, but only causing immense pain instead of expiration. After taking samples, we realized the DNA of the creature was structured differently than before. The treatment seemed to have turned off the ability to die. Of course, once we saw this in the ape subjects, we confirmed it on the human subject as well. The gunshot wound subject was still going, pulse and limited brainwaves active. He's sentient and able to understand basic commands as well as make sounds with great effort. We decided to give him a test under the guise of mercy. He was given a rudimentary order. Blink twice, do you want to die? Once for no. As soon as he blinked twice, Deb injected him with a nerve agent that would cause total death within 5 minutes. After about 2 minutes, he began to seize, body erratically jerking around the bed he was on. His mouth began foaming, loud moans of despair coming out as his eyes rolled back in his head. Pulse dropped, but never flatlined. Brain activity still going the entire way through. Even after a second dose of the nerve agent, he only suffered immense pain, but was unable to die in a conventional form. I took it upon myself, be honest with the other subject, the one who promised an execution for his sins and service. He was distraught, of course, but went quiet after a few moments. We left him be, or at least attempted to, but before the guard in the room could react, the subject stole the gun straight from his holster. Holding the gun to his temple, the subject flipped the safety off and pulled the trigger, splattering more gore on the freshly painted wall. A look of horror filled his eyes before he started screaming, pain of what he had done settling in. The gun never left his temple, and he pulled the trigger 3 more times before falling to the ground. He just lay there twitching, blood pouring from every hole on his face as his brain swirled inside with the lead. We set him up in the lab, pulse still faintly going, and brain waves still giving off from what was left of his skull. In the process of checking him out, we went ahead and did scans on the other subject. Another shock ran through all of us. His brain was reforming, matter forming and splitting off from his other cells like a reverse cancer. Things became bleak after a few days, with the realization that it would only restore the parts involving life functions. They would have a pulse consciousness, full awareness of everything at every second, confirmed by asking the subject questions and receiving answers, but they could not die. It became too much. We almost felt like we owed it to these people to kill them after trying so hard to make a cure. There was one option we had left though, and it was worth a shot. The incinerator. I can still smell his flesh and hear his screams. We put the conspiracy subject in first, thinking it would probably be a little easier on us considering his past. When we set it off, the scream started immediately, the sounds of his limbs thrashing as nerves were burned off at the ends. We were waiting for the screaming to stop, waiting for him to finally fucking die. The screaming kept going. None of us knew what to do. At some point, he must have finally lost consciousness or just become numb to the pain. It took hours. When he finally stopped, we gave it a few minutes before shutting the flames off, pulling the cremation tray out with our fingers crossed that it worked. His charred, blackened body was lying on the tray, twitching every so often. He let out a rasping breath, crispy vocal cords sounding like sandpaper. His pulse still beating, brain activity was still at full capacity, and even with his brain almost melting to the point of soup in his brain, was still conscious. I think we found a way to actually bond the human soul to a genetic code, leaving us trapped in these meat bags through the treatment. We tried other ways, even decapitation as a full-on last resort. A severed, burned head was still giving off brainwaves, even after all of that. Any amount of pain could happen to the body, any amount of restriction and injury inflicted. The soul of the person would stay, brain activity never ceasing. They were trapped in their own head, quite literally, even if the rest of them were destroyed. I couldn't deal with what we had wrought. The realization that saving lives had gone into unethical territory like this, with us damning a human to eternal life. Our only hope to die now was old age, and it didn't look like that was going to happen at this rate either. I finally broke down last week in the lab, seeing the near vegetative body of the cancer patient and the still severed, gawking head of the other. A scalpel was on the table next to me, and I decided it was enough. When I went home that night, I made up my mind. I knew my anatomy, but went into the bathroom to use the mirror just to make sure I was accurate. The scalpel stung as it first cut into my neck, making my hand recoil, but I had to follow through. I swiped it across quickly, slitting my jugular vein and pouring blood into the sink. I didn't realize how much blood I had in me until I saw it on the counter, almost overflowing the sink before the drain could take it all. I choked, unable to breathe as my throat was more concerned with the vein that was slit. My breath caught, bleeding everywhere. The last thing I remembered was falling back into unconsciousness, though it wasn't a complete blackout. I kept having waking nightmares, on the floor in a sea of my own blood, unable to move as I lay face down, iron taste on my tongue. By the time I was able to get up, that had closed up, healing like a normal wound would. It was 3 days from when I tried, and all I got was waking up in a pool of my own coagulating blood. I don't know if we flew too close to the sun, or maybe we were part of the experiment. At this time, I believe the strain that caused the loss of death may have gone airborne in the lab, bypassing the injectable treatment method. I'm giving you this warning so you can do what I can't. It's only a matter of time until this is everywhere, considering we've been free to go in and out of the lab as we please. Find a way to die now, before you lose your chance forever. The darkness grows thicker with each tale. Step further into the abyss with this next story. Billy and the Lanternfly. A loud, buzzing alarm disturbed the sleep of a large man slumbering in his sweat-drenched bed. The sound rang in his ears, already sending a jolt of agitation to his psyche. Damn it. The man spat with frustration as he threw his fist down on the snooze button of the alarm clock. I hate that damn thing. He sat up, bare feet hitting countless empty beer cans on the dirty floor. This specific individual went by the name of Billy Boltz, a full-time mason for a local bricklaying and stone restoration company in the backwoods town of Buckbarren Hills. A heavy-set individual with a large belly, gray hair that always stood up in random patches. He walked with a limp part-time due to the occasional case of gout that affected his right foot. He chain-smoked menthol cigarettes that left him with a disgusting cough that sometimes turned into an even more grotesque gagging fit. He spoke with a gravely tone that was plagued by a ridiculous stutter. This particular morning marked his 35th year in the trade. As Billy stretched with his hands towards the ceiling, an aroma of sulfur crept into his nostrils. He looked to his left, noticing a faint glow of fire on his dresser. A small ring appeared with tendrils of smoke rising from it. Small black legs rose from the ring, followed by beady red eyes attached to an oblong body made of brownish-gray matter. Black spots speckled the dingy-colored sections of its body. The insect in question was a rather large lanternfly. It spun around and focused its eyes at the man and spoke in a voice that resembled what you would expect an elderly Cajun fellow to sound like. "Good morning, Billy boy." It skittered its tiny legs back and forth in a rocking motion, periodically flapping its wings to reveal an underbelly of white and red. Billy rolled his eyes and replied, And good more morning to you too, Wilhelm." Billy sat back down to nurse the throbbing in his big toe. He examined it, noticing a gleam of pus beginning to ooze from the skin near the nail. Creature flapped its wings again and shouted gleefully, "Breakfast." The lanternfly flew in haste towards Billy, landing on the infected toe. A long green proboscis ejected from the insect's mouth and began slurping up the disgusting fluid. This lanternfly hailed from an insectoid dimension from the northern atmosphere of the 11th Circle of Hell. Its name was Wilhelm Odorous Abernathy V, a distant cousin to the infamous Beelzebub, Lord of the Flies. Billy had accidentally summoned this creature when he was a young boy. He and a friend picked on a quiet little girl who later claimed to put a roulette on them. A roulette is a crudely manufactured type of hex, created from the combination of New Orleans voodoo and backcountry superstition. This was a common thing in the wooded atmosphere of Buckbarren Hills. Southern paranoia blended with Creole curses and a dash of hillbilly mysticism. The specific region in which Billy grew up was chock full of things associated with the dark arts and flawed pseudosciences. The further north you went, the less common such practices and beliefs would be. However, later through the years, these types of beliefs and rituals eventually faded away. When the little girl muttered a cryptic phrase and left a stray doll in the form of Billy and his friend, he panicked and sought a way to expel the roulette. His grandmother was part Haitian and was known for her dabbling in the old ways. So he raided her room and found an old book. He skimmed the pages until he found a section involving protection. He followed the instructions to the letter, cutting hair from his and his friend's scalp, swallowing a leech whole, burning sage with the accompanying cat's eyes. The last item came from a stray that had been hanging around his farm. Add these to the removal of exactly 7 drops of blood and a tooth. Ritual had begun. Soon a small ring of fire formed, smoke billowing to reveal the demonic insect. To make a long story short, the roulette was lifted, but at the cost of the little girl's life. The body was never found. Only Billy and Wilhelm know the location of the poor girl's body. Her death was administered by Billy alone, the influence of the demonic lanternfly. From that day on, Wilhelm would drop by to check on Billy. Offerings of spoiled meat and bodily fluids were demanded to keep the beast at bay. This went on for decades, and Billy did his best to keep the creature pleased. Unfortunately, he did not read the fine print of the page. It stated that the protection lasted for life, leaving the caster in perpetual debt. There was also a miscommunication between what Billy read and what was on the aged paper. However, Wilhelm destroyed the page and caused old Granny Boltz's heart to give out. So he would never truly know exactly what he had done that day. All he knew was that he had a hellspawn that would never leave him. The question of whether or not the process of ridding himself of the roulette was worth it also remained with him. After the puss was completely sucked from the infected toe, Wilhelm flew off and Billy began to get dressed. Clothes on and boots tied, he stepped outside and lit a cigarette. Coughed, gagged, and threw up a little in his mouth. By this time, Wilhelm had disappeared out of sight, back to the realms of hell, no doubt. Billy wondered what the bug did when it was not on Earth, as he tended to the chickens and cows before getting into his rusty old pickup and heading to the current job site. There are very few large buildings in Buckbarron Hills, and most houses are composed of wood. But further down the region in Thistle Valley, one can see brick homes and a few grand structures. That was where business took place for the company that employed Billy. Majority of the jobs involved cutting and repointing the joints of brick buildings or chimneys of homes, cleaning decades worth of grime via chemicals, and caulking windows. Every so often a larger job would need demolition in order to remove and replace damaged sections of structures. That was exactly the process for the contracting operation Billy was currently headed to. He was the foreman on the site with 4 journeymen and 1 laborer. The building was an elementary school composed of tan brick that was cracking in certain areas. Some sections had even crumbled from wear and tear. The contract was to replace the fallen and cracked brick and repoint specific joints, spot pointing to be exact. Scaffolding structures surrounded the affected areas. There was also an extra process of cleaning old carbon stains from one wall. This required the use of a chemical called 766 masonry rewash solution, thick mucus-like material made to eat away at anything not native to stone. The cleaner itself is very toxic and can eat away flesh, which requires heavy-duty rubber gloves, safety glasses, and rain gear to avoid any injury. It was to be applied, washed, then washed away with the use of a pressure washing machine. 2 men worked on the brick, while the other 2 focused on the cleaning. The laborer was there to mix mortar, stock brick, and man the 2 pulley systems on the scaffolding, using those apparatuses to send buckets of debris and such up or down to the men above. All the while, Billy sat in his truck, chain-smoking and barking orders. Everyone there hated this, but preferred that over him showing up to examine them. Billy had a major anger problem that led to screaming and tools flying through the air. To say people despised working for him was an understatement. The day went as usual, with Billy showing up at 6:30. Eventually, everyone else began to arrive. The first 2 members of the crew showed up at the same time, 6:45. Then another with the laborer showing up not far behind. Then finally, at 5 minutes past 7, the last member made his obnoxious appearance. An ugly lifted truck blaring David Allan Coe through the speakers. This journeyman was the most problematic. He was always late, and it drove Billy nuts. He would yell at the man constantly for his tardiness, but to no avail. He even tried getting the man fired, but that didn't work either, because this particular individual was the nephew of the owner of the company. The men stood around Billy's truck, removing their tool bags from their vehicles before receiving the daily greeting from their boss. "Good Friday, gentlemen. And how are we this more morning?" Each gave their response, then asked how he was. This was followed by one of Billy's many odd phrases. Fair to Midland, lads. Fair to Midland." After the cordial niceties finished, it was time for work. Angle grinders wiring, sending clouds of dust to fly through the air. The smell of chemicals that were applied to the stained brick on the south wall of the building. And on the ground near a mixing trough was the laborer, combining dry components to water, scraping and mixing the concoction with a hoe. Back and forth until the mixture settled. This is when Billy would yell at the young man, 2-2-2-1, kid." He was referring to the formula of 2 parts sand and 1 part mortar powder in order to create the ideal texture to be used in laying the new brick. Billy also had issues with the laborer. It seemed like the laborer was always making mistakes that muddled with the production of work. Incorrect measurements of mortar, applying too much or too little water, looking at his phone when work needed to be done. And there was the time when the young man was cleaning the second frame of scaffolding and accidentally knocked over a full bucket of debris. It fell and sent chunks of broken brick tumbling towards Billy's truck. Few dents and a crack in the windshield ended up sending him into a wild frenzy. Screaming, cussing, and he almost climbed up and fought the laborer. So needless to say, this person was on Billy's constant radar. There were issues with pretty much everyone on the job. But then again, Billy had problems with everyone he encountered. That also applied to those who worked under his iron fist of slavery. The whole crew despised him, but dealt with the bastard strictly for the money. The day ended with little incident, and Billy only had to yell 4 times, which was a low amount for him. He sped off and drove back to his dilapidated home to load his truck up for the weekend. He had a cabin up towards Cedar Mountain that was used for fishing, and it also housed the remains of a few individuals he had sacrificed for Wilhelm in his early years. The creature's appetite fluctuated with time. Most offerings came in the form of Billy's bodily fluids and entrails from any animal that met their end through the man's hunting trips. But there had been some occasions where human remains were demanded. Billy fought the request, but Wilhelm's grip on him was too strong. Although to the human eye, creature appeared to be only the size of a thumb. Behind the veil of camouflage, a behemoth of enormous proportions made up the existence, the demonic insect. Its intangible talons were capable of digging deep into Billy's mind. He disobeyed. The pain was excruciating and left him with no choice but to listen and do as he was instructed. It was rare for this to happen, but when it did, it was shown who held the reins to Billy's existence. This is why at the furthest end of the cabin sat a small graveyard. Unnoticeable to most, but Billy was constantly reminded of the bodies that lay in their eternal beds beneath the land he owned. It sickened him, and he prayed to God for help, but Wilhelm would laugh. "There's no God here to help you, Billy boy." Billy spent that weekend fishing for largemouth bass and a few bluegill. The guts and egg sacs were set aside in a ceramic jar. After the weekend ended, he headed back home. After unloading his things, he walked to a dark corner in his bedroom with the ceramic jar in hand. He lit 3 candles on a small table. It was decorated with various bone fragments, small glass bottles of dark liquids, dried herbs, and etched into the wood was a symbol, one associated with Wilhelm, 3 circles connected by various acute angles. Billy set the jar down and removed the lid. The candle's flames grew and turned green. A whining noise caused the floor to vibrate under his feet, and smoke rose from the table. A small circle of fire erupted, and out popped the lanternfly. It shifted its beady eyes between Billy and the jar full of entrails. My, what a feast. Wilhelm twitched a thin leg that landed on the jar. Billy nervously scratched at the stubble on his chin. There's your offering for this season. Fear and hope nestled inside those words of the man. Fear of the demon and hope that the offering would suffice for a long while. Wilhelm fluttered its wings, performing a hopping motion to land on the ceramic lid. A long proboscis emerged, growing to the size of an earthworm. The end opened up to reveal jagged yellow fangs, stabbed at the putrid-smelling fish organs. The creature slurped and moaned with delight. Black dots shifted in circular motions through the powder material of brown and gray wings. In a matter of minutes, the entire jar was empty. Afterwards, Wilhelm brought its attention back to Billy. "'Tis a fine meal, but only time will tell if I crave more sustenance for this season, lad." A high-pitched buzz filled the room, and in a flash of ominous light, Wilhelm disappeared through a cloud of smoke. The next week started off with no incidents or complications. Brick was beginning to be replaced, and the cleaning on the other section of the building was nearly finished. Billy only had to yell 3 times over the course of Monday and Tuesday. Things took a different turn on Wednesday morning. He woke up with a hangover, but that was usual. The unusual part was the lack of noises coming from the chicken coop. Normally, the rooster would be crowing and the hens clucking behind the latched door. Billy walked up to the small enclosure to silence. He unhooked the lock and opened up to a horrid scene of blood and feathers. All the poultry had been ripped apart. Crimson stains had been splashed on the walls. The hay was drenched in fluid, organs, and excrement. Every chicken had been slaughtered, torn open carcasses and their heads ripped from their necks. Billy choked on his own vomit from the scene, and all of a sudden a buzzing rang in his ears. A low humming tune echoed within the coop. Standing on top of the mutilated body of the rooster was Wilhelm. His green, monstrous appendage was chomping down on the remnants of a neck. "Billy boy, apologies for the mess, but I just had an outstanding craving this morning. I hope you don't mind. Don't worry, give me a few hours and these feeble bodies will be gone." The insect fluttered its wings as it spoke. Billy stammered over his words, which made the stutter he was cursed with even more apparent. "What did you do?" My. Wilhelm cut him off mid-sentence. "Hush now, old chap. I had a hunger that needed to be satisfied. You were sleeping so peacefully, and I thought not to wake you. Now run along, you'll be late for work." Billy backed away and jumped with fright when one of the slain hen's legs jerked. He turned and ran. A sharp shooting pain radiated in his foot, a sure sign the gout was about to kick in. He didn't have time to nurse the foot, so he hopped in his truck and rushed to work. The events of the morning had him shook, but there was nothing to be done, so he prayed that work would keep him distracted. Billy arrived at the job site a little later than usual, but still made it before everyone else. He sat in his truck, smoking a cigarette. He rolled it back and forth between his fingers as the images of his desecrated livestock flooded his mind's eye. The throbbing in his foot intensified. He jumped when one of the journeymen approached his truck to greet him. They could see something was wrong, but didn't bother inquiring about the man's odd behavior. Work began, and everyone was surprised that Billy wasn't barking orders or yelling at the laborer. Couldn't be bothered with those things. His mind was still back in the chicken coop. The smell of sulfur filled the cab of the truck, and a small flame erupted on the dashboard. Billy choked on cigarette smoke when he watched Wilhelm leap out of the fire. "My dear Billy, how art thou? I want you to know the mess back home is all clean. I even lapped up the blood off the walls for you." The insect rubbed a black, thin arm across those hellish eyes. It walked towards the steering wheel in a jerky, robotic motion. Billy ripped his hands from the wheel in order to avoid contact. "What are you doing here?" Billy was confused. Wilhelm had never appeared when he was at work, and the damn thing had eaten a whole flock of chickens. There was absolutely no reason for the demonic bug to be there. Wilhelm rested on the center of the steering wheel and stared for a while. "Well, my boy, you see, that hunger of mine is still ravenous. Unfortunately, the poultry was but a mere snack. I believe it's time for something more substantial. After all, it has been over a decade." Billy knew all too well what this meant. The last time this happened, he was tasked with burying 2 bodies on the lot of his cabin. I can't do that here. Billy's heart thumped hard in his chest. The insect cleaned itself and stretched out one wing, then folded it. You will give me what I want, Billy boy. You always do. This was true. The last time Billy tried to deny Wilhelm, it did not end so well. The hold this creature had on the man was immeasurable. What do you want? The worry of acting out another case of gruesome murder began to weigh heavy on Billy. He wanted to disappear and be free of Wilhelm's grasp, but knew that was impossible. The chipper lanternfly hopped up and glided on spotted wings to land on the man's shoulder. For starters, I would rather enjoy a fresh and plump set of ocular organ. Perhaps the tall one would suffice. The tall one, as Wilhelm described, was the journeyman who always gave Billy a hard time. He had always wanted to tussle with the man, but the thought of murder never crossed his mind. Billy didn't argue, and like an obedient pet, he exited the truck and walked towards the scaffold. After a treacherous climb of 40 feet, he made it to the deck, where 2 men were laying brick. One was using a chipping hammer to pop out some of the leftover mortar joints, while the other was scooping and placing new wet mortar with a trowel. As Billy approached, the tall one was placing a half-broken brick in the wall. How's it going, lads? He asked the men, hiding his solemn knowledge of what was about to happen. The one using the power tool didn't react on account of him wearing headphones to block out the noise, while the other asked why Billy was up there. The conversation was made short when Wilhelm, still sitting on Billy's shoulder, hissed into his ear, "Do it. Now." Billy's hand shook as he grabbed a brick hammer that was laying next to a stack of bricks. He gripped the handle and raised it over his head. The tall man was kneeling down, smoothing out the overflowing mortar between the new course of bricks. He looked over his shoulder. His eyes grew wide when he saw the tool fly towards him. It landed on the side of his head, sending a loud and wet crack that spurted blood. It spread and landed on the wall and on Billy's cheek. He ripped the hammer from the cracked skull and repeated 3 more times until the man's body went limp. His partner did not react and continued working. Wilhelm hopped and glided towards the corpse with a jagged hole in the battered skull. The creature moved in that unnatural motion to a pair of still open eyes. It hummed a tune and released that gigantic green organ and began to devour the lifeless orbs. Billy just stood there with the hammer still in his hand. Blood and viscera slowly dripped from one end. The man with the power tool paused what he was doing and removed one of his earplugs. He turned to see the insect eating his partner and let out a scream. Wilhelm shouted at Billy, "Silence that one." With no will to hesitate, Billy landed a blow of the hammer to the screaming man's head. A thud followed a loud bang of the power tool that fell onto the aluminum deck. The journeyman began convulsing, blood oozing from the wound. Wilhelm hopped onto Billy's shoulder, then forced its way into his ear canal. Small arms dug into the flesh and worked Billy like a puppet, placed a boot on the man's chest, and leaned over to grab the chipping gun. He placed the bit on his employee's forehead and pulled the trigger. Loud pounding resonated from the power tool, sending the long bit to hammer through flesh and into the skull. Cracking bone and liquids flew from the crude opening until the bit rammed all the way through to the other side. This was indicated by the clattering of metal against metal as the deck rattled under Billy's feet. His finger released the trigger, and his legs were forced to walk up to the safety bars of the scaffolding frame. He removed them from the pins and jumped. Billy dropped like a stone to the ground, but sustained no injury thanks to the hellspawn bug controlling his body. An electrifying sensation shook his eardrum, and Wilhelm's voice echoed, "Off to the next 2 oblivious drones." 1 foot in front of the other, and Billy was running towards the other side of the building. He scaled the scaffolding like some kind of crazed primate, gripping bars and hurtling himself upwards with little effort. In a blink of an eye, he was at the top. 2 men in yellow rain gear were cleaning the carbon-encrusted wall. A bucket of that gooey acidic sludge was being applied with a large brush, and at the far end was a pressure washing machine. Billy's presence startled the men, and they jumped back. He grabbed one by the shoulders and threw him off of the deck. Poor soul fell with a hard thud to the ground, A bellowing wail of pain followed him. "I want to see his skin melt," Wilhelm demanded inside of Billy's head, digging those sharp legs deeper into the flesh. The frightened journeyman started to back away, hands raised in defense. Billy's leg raised and kicked the him in the stomach. He fell on his back, air forcefully leaving his lungs. A jolt of fire charged Billy's arms to grip the bucket of chemical and dump it on the man. His face became covered in goo. The sound of agonizing cries sent bile to rise in Billy's stomach. He wanted to stop, but was trapped, witnessing the horror his body was creating. No way of preventing the chaos. Small sores slowly began to rip open on the flesh of the man's face and neck. The chemical was eating away at the soft tissue, leaving countless lesions that expelled viscera. "Let's give the man a little rinse. Shall we, Billy boy? I want to taste some cartilage." A sinister laugh filled the valley of audio organs inside Billy's head. His body was forced towards the pressure washer. Memories of the little girl from his past flooded his mind. Gruesome still images of her disfigured body sent a trail of tears to leak from his eyes. The past was repeating itself, but with a horrendous multiplication of gore. A hand set the choke, while the other pulled at the drawstring. The machine roared to life, rattling in the atmosphere. Billy gripped the handle of the pressure gun and walked back to the still screaming man. He pulled the trigger, releasing a wide stream of high-velocity water. It tore through the skin, rubbing it off in chunks. Blood spewed and mixed with the water, creating a pink mist. He pushed the tip closer, which started to remove other pieces of tissue, all the while the victim wailed in utter agony. The tip of the gun was then placed inside of the man's mouth, filling it with water while also shredding the internal tissue of his throat. Eventually, the man drowned from a mixture of water, blood, and his own flesh. Wilhelm applauded his disciple. "Well done, old chap. Now rip me off a piece of his face. Do chew it for me, please." Billy gripped a section of rigid white material that sat around the nasal cavity of the skinned face. It took some effort, but eventually he was able to remove a piece. He popped it in his mouth and began to chew. It felt like stiff rubber and tasted putrid, like melted plastic and copper. His stomach turned, but he continued, then swallowed. An odd taste, but is much more elegant than aged fish eggs. Now let's go check on your fallen comrade. In another feat of amazing descent, Billy landed a few stories below. He could feel the sensation of pus explode from his infected toe. Pain pulsated in his foot, but his body continued to move. The other journeyman was still alive, attempting to crawl to safety. Billy walked towards him with Wilhelm whispering diabolical things into his ears. Billy ripped the rain jacket off of him and began to stomp on the man's back. Spit flew from a screaming mouth as he tried to plead for his life. Wilhelm gazed through his slave's eyes and spotted a large metal box. The will of the insect caused Billy to pause his assault and step towards the object. He opened the lid to view various tools, wires, brushes, cords, and a roll of plastic. Wilhelm spotted an angle grinder and moved Billy's blood-drenched hand to grab it. The distraught drone walked back, coincidentally spotting a long yellow extension cord near the next victim. The grinder was plugged in, and the button slid to the on position. Tool whirred with velocity, and Billy stepped in front of the journeyman. The spinning diamond blade ate through flesh and bone like butter. Crimson fluid flew through the air, splashing all over Billy. Countless cuts were made across the body. An arm was completely severed. The blade jammed when it came in contact with the spine. Billy tried to pull it free, but was forced to stop. Unbeknownst to him and Wilhelm, the laborer had witnessed the entire onslaught. The young man was standing in awe at the mixing trough, hoe still clutched in his hands. A flutter of wings tickled inside Billy's ear, followed by another command. "Cut that little shit down." Billy ripped the grinder from the mutilated corpse. It began to work again, sending a large chunk of bone flying with a high-pitched whistle. Heavy and fast footfalls stomped their way to the frightened man. "Faster! Faster, you pathetic fool!" Wilhelm shouted. Speed increased, but was abruptly ruined by a bucket full of debris. This sent Billy falling towards the ground, angle grinder firmly clasped in both hands. As he fell, his arms folded towards his chest. With a crash, he fell, and the spinning blade dug into his neck. Momentum and speed ate through all of the muscle and bone. After landing, the blade continued its work until Billy's head held on by a thread. "Damn it, you fumbling buffoon." The frustration of Wilhelm's voice floated towards the laborer. The insect released its grip and exited from Billy's bleeding ear canal. It released its insanely large green proboscis and wrapped it around the head. As Wilhelm scurried, the head dragged across the dirt, leaving behind a trail of blood and mucus. "By the grace of the 5 houses of Abernathy, you are worthless, Billy boy." The insect muttered to itself, then started to chant in a low guttural tone. A small ring of fire and smoke appeared, and Wilhelm walked while continuing its almost inaudible murmurs. The laborer fell backwards and landed in a sitting position. He stared at the sight of a talking lantern fly dragging his boss's decapitated head towards a ring of fire. Wilhelm moved in that robotic motion and stopped to look at the young man. "Best not stay long, lad. Someone may think you did all of this. I'll be back later to check on you." As the words registered in the young man's mind, he watched the bug fall through the hole, dragging Billy Boltz's severed head with him into oblivion. Just when you thought it was safe to turn the page, another nightmare awaits. In loathing memory, most people would probably call me heartless if I dared admitting up front that I am glad that my daughter-in-law passed away recently. But considering how she treated the people around her, I am of the opinion that the world is a better place without her. My beloved son Mike was married to this individual for all of 14 years, and not once has she shown me the amount of respect that a mother-in-law is entitled to. She would insist her remarks were made nicely, or that she and I were just from different cultures and different times, and that she meant no offense, as if being young and from the city made her incapable of knowing her place. First, she made a scene when Mike demanded she quit her job to be his full-time caregiver. She parroted the words of the doctor like a heartless robot. "Lose weight? Work on your mobility?" My son wasn't interested in losing weight or doing physical therapy, but she couldn't accept that. She was just that much of an egocentric piece of work. But I wasn't about to let her forfeit her marital duties. 4 years after we made her quit, she started moaning and making a show about her back pain, which was surely as real as the tooth fairy if you ask me. She managed to convince some gullible doctor who said she shouldn't lift anything heavy anymore or stay up for long periods of time. After a stern phone call, I managed to get it into her head that she had no choice and should keep focusing on my son, as he was clearly the one suffering the most. I tried to use whatever little amount of human decency she had to make sure that she also wouldn't file for divorce, in sickness and in health. That's the Lord's word. And married, they stayed. 2 years after this, I came to their house without warning them in advance. Something I did once in a while to make sure the lazy bum was keeping my son's living environment clean and tidy. I found the girl on the floor and my son lying in bed in his own filth. He cried so hard telling me about how this useless tool had dropped dead with the phone in her pocket, leaving him with no way to ask for help. My poor boy. I still shake imagining what could have happened if it wasn't for my impromptu visit. Her autopsy report read, brain hemorrhage. Well, I did always say that she wasn't right in the head, so it's a fitting end for her. And I know that I can care for Mike much better than she ever did. Good riddance. Terror doesn't end here. It only grows stronger in the next tale. Lost Faces, Act 1, The Red Coat. I had always thought that memories should be fragile, like the brittle leaves that crumbled beneath our boots every autumn. Some memories are sharp, edged like a blade, impossible to dull with time. The image of that red coat, brighter than blood against a backdrop of clear snow, is one of those memories. It was the last thing I saw before I lost everything. My brother's laugh echoed through the empty woods, a high-pitched peal of joy that bounced off the snow-laden trees. Then there was Rupert, the friend who was as much a part of our winter holiday tradition as the icy breath that stung our cheeks, who chased after him, grabbing onto my brother's red coat, which was almost identical to mine, like two flames in the frosted landscape. I trailed behind them, half amused, half bored, elder brother tasked with supervision. I was starting to long for the warmth of our vacation home more than their childish games. The sky was bruised with twilight, deep and ugly purple that whispered of the coming storm. I'd noticed it first, the wind picking up, the sharp bite in the air. "Come on, guys," I called, trying to keep my tone light. "We should head back. Mom'll have dinner ready." Rupert slowed his pace, his reptilian green eyes, always mischievous, always serious, turning back toward me. "A little longer," pleaded, breath puffing out invisible clouds. "Carnival's just ahead." The abandoned carnival had been our playground for as long as I could remember, a special place we had claimed as our own for winter break. It stood at the edge of the forest, its once vibrant tents now sagging under the weight of neglect, rusted rides creaking in the wind. We'd spent hours there, pretending the fair was still alive with lights and cheerful laughter, inventing ghost stories about the place that we half believed were true. They did, of course, not me. But today, the encroaching storm seemed to wrap the woods in a sinister shroud, as though the carnival ahead of us was less a playground and more a trap. I shook my head. "Getting late. I'll come back tomorrow." My brother, always the daring one, always the one to push the limits I tried to set, didn't hear me or didn't want to. "Race you there," he shouted to Rupert, his bright red coat a streak of color as he tore down the path. Rupert hesitated for a moment, glancing back at me, then grinned and followed. I stood there for a beat, watching the two of them fade into the shadows of the trees, a strange unease settling in my stomach. I didn't want to go back. I wanted the cozy embrace of home, smell of the wood fire and the safety of walls around me. But that red coat, it was like a tether, pulling me forward even as the dread in my gut told me to turn back. "Fine," I muttered to myself, tracing them. But just for a minute. When I reached the edge of the carnival, the storm was already announcing itself. The wind howled through the skeletal remains of the Ferris wheel, its rusted metal shrieking in protest as the snow began to fall in earnest. I found them near the funhouse, its broken mirrors still catching the last glints of dying daylight. My brother was leaning against the entrance, breathless but sticking his tongue out mockingly, while Rupert tried to pry open the swollen door. "We really need to go," I urged, my voice sharper than I intended. "Now." My brother's face fell, his defiance melting into disappointment. "Just a little longer," he begged, his eyes wide and imploring. He was always good at that, making me feel guilty, making me question if I was just being too cautious. And I usually gave in, but tonight something fell off, feeling I couldn't shake. "No," I said more firmly. "We need to go home, Gavin. The storm's coming." Rupert, sensing the shift in my tone, stepped back from the door. "He's right," said, though he didn't sound fully convinced himself. His mischievous grin had faded. He was usually the one luring my little brother into risky adventures. My brother looked like he might argue, but something in my expression must have told him it wasn't up for debate this time. "Fine, all right," he muttered, kicking at the snow. "But you so owe me tomorrow, Kendall." "Deal," I said, relieved. "Come on." We began the trek back, the three of us walking side by side through the deepening snow. My brother's hand found mine, his small fingers cold, reassuring in my grip. Rupert walked on the other side of him, his face turned down, lost in thought, probably hesitant to follow because he hadn't told his mom yet that he'd be having dinner with us. The storm picked up pace, the snow falling in thick, heavy flakes that obscured our vision and muffled the world around us. We walked in silence, the only sound the crunch of our boots on the frozen ground. I kept a tight hold on my brother's hand, the red of our coats almost glowing in the twilight. Then we reached the crossroads, the spot where the path split, one way leading back to our vacation home, the other winding deeper into the forest and to Rupert's house. I stopped, feeling that strange unease curl in my gut again. "This is where we split up," Rupert said, his voice flat. "I'll go back to mine. Mom gets lonely on nights like these. She misses me too much." He nodded toward the darker path. "Are you sure?" I asked, hesitating. "Your mom would probably not let you walk back on your own if she knew. Just come back with us. Stay over tonight." He shook his head. "No, I'll be fine. I know this path like the back of my hand. It's not like you vacationers." I turned to my brother. "You go with Rupert, spend the night there," I said, squeezing his hand. "Stick together. Don't let go of each other, okay? I'll tell Mom and Dad to call Martha to make sure you both get there safely. And I'll see you both at our place tomorrow. My brother looked up at me, his eyes wide and uncertain. But you'll be alone. I forced a smile, ruffling his curly hair. I'm older, little rascal. Like Dad says, I'm already a boss. Promise me you'll get home safe. He nodded slowly, reluctantly letting go of my hand to take Rupert's. Promise. I watched them walk away, red coat gradually disappearing into the swirling snow. I stood there until I could no longer see them, the cold seeping through my coat, the storm pressing in on all sides. I wanted to follow them, keep them in sight, but something held me back. Some part of me was still that child who believed that fairy tales were spun out of light. Not all fairy tales had a darker, grittier story behind them, waiting to be told. I turned and started the walk home, alone. The wind was a living thing, pushing against me, trying to drive me back to where I'd come from. But I pushed on, my breath coming in short, visible bursts. I could barely see more than a few feet ahead, the snow blinding, the world around me muted. And that's when I heard it. Crunch of tires on snow, the low hum of an engine. A car appeared out of the whiteout, headlights cutting through the storm like a large machete. It pulled up beside me, a sleek black vintage thing that didn't belong on these roads, not in this weather. The tinted window rolled down just enough for me to see the top half of the driver's face, deep-set eyes under a pale brow, thin nose bridge cut off by the window. You are in danger out there, red coat, the man said, his voice a quirky pattern that sent a shiver down my spine. So fragile, like a dragonfly. Such delicate wings, so easy to bruise. Get in, I'll drive you home. My instincts screamed at me to run. My feet were rooted to the ground. It was like he was telling me a story. I didn't answer, just shook my head, taking a step back. Come on, little dragonfly, he coaxed, his voice softer now, gentle and low. It's not safe out there to fly around. I took another step back, my breath hitching in my throat. No, thank you, I managed to stammer. I live right around the corner. Parents are waiting for me. The man's eyes narrowed, and for a moment I noticed a flicker of something disturbed, gleeful darkness. Then he nodded slowly, the half of his face still hidden. Fly safely, red-coated dragonfly, he said in a squeaking pitch, the window rolling back up. I stood there, watching as the car pulled away, its taillights swallowed by the storm. My heart was pounding in my chest, my skin prickling with unease. Something about the man had felt wicked, deeply, viscerally wrong. But maybe that was my mind playing tricks on me, and he was not a pervert, simply a harmless local freak I hadn't encountered on a better day. I turned and ran the rest of the way home, the snow tearing at my clothes, the wind howling in my ears. When I reached the front door, breathless and shaking, I paused, glancing back the way I'd come. The forest was a wall of white, impenetrable and silent. My parents asked about Gavin and Rupert, and they called Martha to check up on them. Their walk hadn't been long, shorter than mine, in fact. I waited, listening for the sound of laughter from their end of the line, for the sight of my parents' subtle concern to fade away. But it didn't happen, because only Rupert had made it to his mom. His account. Gavin had left him to follow me back, regretting his decision, my decision, for him to stay at Rupert's overnight. And Rupert just wanted to go home. That night, the storm raged, tearing through the trees with a fury I'd never seen before. My parents called the police when hours passed without my brother being found, their faces pale with fear as we searched outside, and none of us could find him. I told the police about the man in the car, about the way he'd looked at me, but the main officer seemed to dismiss it as a boy's overactive imagination, while the others wrote it down. A sense of panic and dread loomed over their hollow expressions, their necks drenched in sweat. They searched the forest and the carnival as much as possible given the conditions. There was no sign of him. No footprints, no abandoned red coat, nothing. As the night turned into a new day, every inch of the town was being combed. I had to give information to a woman who sketched the half I had seen of the stranger's face and his car. The same for Rupert, who claimed to have seen an old vintage car out in the distance on his way back too. The guilt consumed me, an unrelenting beast that gnawed at my inside. It should have been me, I told myself over and over again. I should have stayed with them, should have protected them, should have been the one to disappear. But the truth was bleaker, something I couldn't even admit to myself at the time. I had been afraid, afraid of the storm, the man in the car, of something I couldn't name but felt deep in my bones. And because of that fear, I had miscalculated what was safe and left them to wander on their own. My brother was never found again. The years passed, but that night didn't. It burrowed deep, festering, growing with each passing winter, like I could wake up from any dream or nap and be right in that moment I last saw my brother's face, his small body walking away from me. The first few years, my parents insisted that we keep returning to that town, for the memories and the grief, for the resistance to let the officers do their job, and for us to let go of our control. But through my late teenage years and early adulthood, the obsession with uncovering what happened to Gavin clawed at me, hunting me down in nightmares like a pack of hyenas, their high-pitched, maniacal cackling echoing through every corner of my mind. I grew up, managed to pull it together for my degrees, tried to move on, but that his red coat was always there. I was still tethered, and now, as I sit in this chilling diner alone on another winter break, staring at the man who has haunted my nightmares for so long, I know that I can never escape it. Because some memories aren't fragile. Some memories are sharp, edged like a blade. And today, I will finally face the man who holds the other end of that blade. Lost Faces, Act 2, The Unseen Stranger. The diner's neon sign flickers outside, casting a red glow on the snow-covered street. My heart is in my throat. Collecting my thoughts feels like grasping for something solid in a frost smoke. The warmth in the booth is a deceptive comfort, wrapping me in its embrace as I sit across from the man, the dark figure from my nightmare. The stranger from the snowstorm is here, in the flesh, but he has not aged a day. His wide eyes are like dark pits, filled with a void. His slim nose looks unnatural, almost surgical. His long, pale hair hangs around his shoulders, and even from a distance, seeing his full face for the first time sends a shiver down my spine. He has an underbite, and his thin lips curl downward in a disturbed expression I've never seen before. I watch him eat moist bacon with his fingers, my pulse a chaotic drumbeat. His presence is both familiar and foreign, bringing me right back to the snowstorm, to the last time I saw Gavin. The diner is nearly empty, save for a few scattered patrons and the hum of the old jukebox in the corner. I lean in closer, trying to glean some hint of recognition from his expression, but his gaze remains inscrutable. The man is lost in his coffee, stirring it absently, as if he has all the time in the world. It feels like I'm dreaming. This can't be real, not after all this time, but it has to be him. I fumble with my phone, texting the lead investigator from back then, an old man I've seen around often, but who dismissed my theory about the stranger from the get-go. I wait for his reply to my cryptic message, stating that I have breaking news about the case that I need to discuss in person, before arranging a time to meet up today. It feels final, like the end is just around the corner, and I need to be certain I have all the details right. We pick a time, 5 p.m. sharp at my vacation home. The stranger gets up from his booth, ready to leave. I can't let him go, so I decide to do the same, my mind racing with the implications of what might happen next. Is his identity really enough to warrant an arrest? Should I try to catch him in the act of something suspicious? I follow his vintage car from the diner to the outskirts of town. There is a secluded mountain cabin, hidden away by dense woods and dirt roads, and it seems to be where he retreats when not in the public eye. My breath fogs up the windows as I drive with a careful gap between us, the road winding and bumpy. The cabin appears as a dark silhouette against the snow-covered moss and tall pine trees. It is a simple structure, weather-beaten and isolated, the trees seeming to close in. I park at a distance, careful to stay out of sight, and approach the cabin with the stealth of a hunter. The secrets are tangible in the air, clammy and musty. This man holds answers to what happened with my brother. As I hide outside the secluded mountain cabin, the snowflakes dance around me like ghosts eager to consume everything they touch. My heart pounds with both fear and excitement. This is it. The cold air bites into my skin as I crouch behind a dense cluster of bushes, my breath forming clouds that dissolve into the early afternoon. I've hidden a small pocket knife in my sock for safety. I can see the man's long silhouette moving behind the curtains. My hands tremble as I pull out my phone and scroll to Rupert's number. It has been years since we last spoke, Our friendship fractured from the moment Gavin disappeared and never fully recovered. But I need him now. I need him to verify what I have seen, to confirm that this man, the one I have found after all these years, is the same man with the same car we both saw on that terrible night. The phone rings twice before Rupert answers, his voice groggy and confused. Kendall? That's a surprise. What's going on? Rupert, I whisper, my voice shaking. I found him. I found the stranger from that night. The one with the car. The one we both saw near the carnival. There's a long pause on the other end of the line. I can almost hear the gears turning in Rupert's mind, the memories we have both tried to bury surfacing with a jolt. That's not possible. Are you sure? Finally asks, his voice tense. It's been so long. I'm sure, I insist, snapping a picture of the car with my phone and sending it to him. I'm outside his cabin right now. Look at the photo. Tell me if you recognize it. There's a brief silence as Rupert receives the image, followed by a sharp intake of breath. Oh my God, Kendall. That's the same car, he says, his voice low. Kendall, you need to get out of there. This guy is a potential. I need to know, I interrupt, desperation creeping into my voice. I need to make sure it's really him. He can't keep hiding or getting away anymore. Rupert hesitates for a moment. You're not going to do something stupid, are you? Catch him doing something shady, find some evidence. Oh my God, I can't believe this, he whispers as if in disbelief. I don't blame him. Send me your location and wait for me. We'll do this together. I'm not letting another brother wander off alone. I stare down at the snow crawling up my ankles. Yeah, right. Me neither. I send him the location, and as I wait, I can't shake the feeling that I'm on the brink of something monumental, something that could finally bring closure or shatter the fragile normalcy I have managed to build over the years. When Rupert arrives, the air between us is heavy and dreadful. He parks his car next to mine, hidden away, and approaches cautiously, his face colorless under the bleached sunlight. Man, this is crazy, he whispers as he crouches down beside me. What's the plan? Explosives? Beat him up until he confesses? I side-eye him. No, we're breaking in whenever he leaves or falls to rest. The cabin remains silent, the man inside unaware of the two intruders lurking just beyond his walls. We watch for what feels like an eternity until he finally emerges, his face hidden beneath the brim of a worn hat. Walks with a slow, deliberate pace, almost as if he's savoring the stillness of nature. As he climbs into his car and drives away, a weight is lifted off my shoulders, and a new kind of tension kicks. Time has come to face whatever horrors lie inside that cabin. Rupert and I exchange a look, a wordless agreement passing between us. We move quickly and quietly, making our way to the front door. My hands fumble with the lock, and in my haste, I kick the door open with more force than I intend. The door swings inward with a loud creak, revealing the dimly lit interior. Inside, the air is thick with a mildewed odor, a mix of aged wood and thick smoke. My heart pounds in sync with the creaking floorboards. The interior is sparse but unsettling. Rusty tools hang on the walls, and the furniture is a haphazard collection of old, worn pieces. An old-fashioned radio crackles softly in the background. I can almost hear the sobbing ghosts of the past blending with the static. A large, dust-covered desk dominates the room, its surface littered with documents and photographs detailing the search for missing children and body snatching from local graveyard. The sketches of the man are unmistakable, the same disturbing features I had seen years ago. I snap photos of everything, documenting the evidence with a feverish urgency. Lost faces stare up at me, begging to be seen, found. I feel a chill crawl up my spine as I recognize one of the faces staring back at me from the yellowed paper. Still missing. My brother. Rupert sifts through the evidence with shaking hands, his face growing whiter with each revelation. It's really him, he mutters, his voice barely above a whisper. This freak. He's been following the cases, collecting information. Maybe we should leave now? I just need to gather everything, show it to the detectives. This is unsettling, he admits, flipping through a stack of prints. We need to watch out for ourselves. If we report this, we could get into trouble for breaking and entering, not to mention how this evidence was obtained. I nod, my mind spinning. The evidence is damning, but Rupert is right. Breaking into the cabin and stealing these documents could land us in serious trouble. We need to approach this carefully, or risk losing everything we've uncovered. Come to my place, Rupert urges. We'll sort through what we found and figure out the best way to present it to the detectives. You don't want legal trouble because of this, man. Let's take the evidence to my place, review it more thoroughly, and figure it out. I have no answer, only a knot in my stomach growing tighter as I scan the evidence. Old photographs, some dating back decades, show children, smiling, unsuspecting, moments before they disappeared forever. Handwritten notes detail their last known locations, their families' desperate pleas for help, and the dead ends that led to cold cases. Okay, I acknowledge, no legal troubles. We go to your place. An engine rumbles, approaching in the distance. I freeze, the blood draining from my face. He is returning. This place is a mess. Hurry, I hiss, grabbing as many papers as I can and stuffing them into my coat. Rupert nods, his eyes wide with fear, and we bolt for the door. We barely make it outside when the man's car pulls up. We duck behind the trees, our breaths ragged as we watch him step out of the car, unsuspecting. He moves with an eerie calm, singing a lullaby in high-pitched staccato shrieks. He stops, tilting his head as if listening for something. Then, suddenly, he lets out a scream. Primal, piercing wail that echoes through the forest like the cry of a tortured child. The sound is unnatural, demonic, and it sends a wave of terror through my entire being. The man's scream continues frantically, an outburst that shatters the silence of the woods. He is pacing at the broken entrance, waving his long hands in front of his face for air, and Rupert and I watch from the shadows, paralyzed but desperate to get away from this scene. "Oh," Rupert sighs, his voice trembling. "Race you to the cars." Reluctantly, I agree. We storm back to our cars without looking back, the man's scream still echoing in my ears. "Hey, you! Red coat, red coat!" I hear the voice screaming operatically. "Red coat, red coat, red coat!" We jump into the cars, speeding away from the cabin, kicking dirt up from the ground, eyes fixed on the road. Arriving at Rupert's mom's house, a large, old-fashioned residence that seems both grand and oppressive, I feel a knot of anxiety twist in my stomach. The house is warm and inviting, but I can't shake the adrenaline from our escape. It's like warm blood is stuck at the back of my throat. Rupert's mother greets us with a strained smile, her eyes flicking nervously between us. "Kendall, nice to finally see you again." Voice creaks. "What's going on? You both look like you've seen the dead rise. Why don't we go over the evidence in the study?" Rupert ignores her, leading me into a room lined with shelves of old books and dusty artifacts. The room is an oasis of warmth and old-world charm, but it does little to calm my unease. "Sorry, I'm just shaken, Martha," call out to Rupert's mom, who stays out of the room. "It's good to see you too. Things will be good now." As I settle into an armchair, Rupert and I pull out the pictures and documents, studying them. The upholstery of the chair feels strangely textured beneath me. The fabric seems unnervingly lifelike, its pattern disturbingly familiar. I try to focus on the task at hand, but the sensation is unsettling. Martha brings us tea, her movements hurried and tense. As we sift through the evidence, trying to piece together the puzzle, I notice her eyes darting toward us with an anxious look. There is something unsettling about her demeanor. I try to shake off the feeling, focusing on the papers and notes spread out before me. But the room's oppressive atmosphere seems to close in, making it hard to concentrate. Rupert stares straight at me with his mischievous grin. "We did it," he says nonchalantly. "The case is closed." "Maybe I could send it in anonymously," I suggest, trying to steady my nerves. If he gets convicted, no one would believe that he actually saw us breaking into his cabin. Before I can delve deeper, I feel a sudden rush of dizziness. The room swirls around me, and I look up to see Martha approaching with a chloroform-soaked rag. Panic surges through me as I realize what is happening. No. Her reptilian green eyes, like Rupert's, pierce through me with intense distress as she presses the rag against my face. Rupert's icy, rough hands hold me down steadily and violently as I fight back. This is wrong. This can't be true. I got it all wrong. My vision fades into a swirling void, and the encroaching darkness presses in, suffocating me. Lost Faces, Act 3. The Winter's Grip. There's a chilling finality in the way the basement door creaks open, grim proclamation of the horrific scene that surrounds me. I'm tethered to the bed, my wrists bound tightly with coarse rope that cuts into my skin. Pillow beneath my head feels as grotesque as the armchair. As I sit up, the weight of my soul slips away, leaving my body a shell, eyes wide open and mouth agape. I'm frozen. My brother's face, his hair, I could recognize it even in a million years, no matter the shape or condition. His pillow tests my limits. His skin and curls have been twisted into something almost unrecognizable. A nauseating dread flows inside me like sharp, aggressive waves. Pillowcase is him. He has become it, sewn into a morbid tribute to my lost sibling, fashioned from his skin. The basement smells of decay and a faint metallic tang. The dim light from a single flickering bulb illuminates the gritty walls. This is where I die, I think. Rupert appears at the top of the stairs, his eyes glinting with a self-satisfied smirk. "Kendall," he says, his voice a smooth, mocking caress. "You didn't have to do this." Being such a thorn in my side, I keep staring at the repulsive pillowcase I had passed out on, breathless. Gavin is dead. I suddenly realize it, like a pressure that's been pressing on my skull for an eternity and now has been released. After all these years, he really did die. Our childhood friend Rupert, the one who shared laughter and snowball fights, is hurting me. Did he hurt my brother? The betrayal cuts deeper than any knife. He steps down into the basement with a casual, almost practiced ease, as if he's descending into his own private theater of horror. "Do you know," Rupert says, his voice laced with cruel satisfaction, "how close you were to getting me arrested, and you." He pauses, his eyes darkening. "You don't even know half of the story." "I don't know any of it," I assure him, my voice trembling. "What happened to Gavin? How could someone do this?" I point at the pillowcase with my chin, nausea rising in my throat. He paces slowly around the room, his expression calm yet content. "My mom says I have dark urges. I don't think they're dark at all, perfectly natural. Sometimes the best thing in the world is getting in touch with our animalistic instinct. Then I express it afterwards in an art form, to relive it. I've done it since that night, my first time." "So it is him? He killed Gavin?" "It isn't." "So it isn't the man? He's not involved in any of this?" "Oh, he kind of is. He saw me that night, in the middle of it, too." "Just say what happened to my little brother, you freak." I spit out, my blood boiling from fury and fear. He nods, sitting at the edge of the squeaky bed. I had long thought about killing. That was one of my first thoughts, I think. I want to take a life and play with the remains. We killed an animal, you know? Do you remember? That winter I shot a rabbit, dissected it, and it felt... Truth be told, it didn't feel like much. But I was used to feeling numb, and the killing gave purpose to that feeling. Like, it made sense that it should feel nothing too. And, back to that night, I saw my opportunity, chasing a thrill, losing myself to my natural instincts for once. I swear, your brother's fate was sealed the moment he followed that path alone with me. It was so easy, Kendall, so easy. The memory of that night rushes back, a relentless wave of regret. Rupert's confession is like acid, burning through the thin veneer of my mind. I can almost see it. The way I pressured Gavin into following Rupert, the way I chose that for him and sealed his fate. A moment I can never take back, knowing who hurt him. "Did you do it alone?" I ask through gritted teeth, biting hard to keep myself from letting out an agonizing scream. Pain of losing a brother, coming to understand the suffering he endured. I just picked up a large rock behind him and smashed it into his skull without him even looking. It was a dull thud. He didn't die. I thought he would from the force of it. So I strangled him with my bare hands, even got his skin deep under my fingernails. It wasn't a hard job, but he tried to fight back. His eyes kept flicking and rolling to the back of his head, probably losing consciousness from the skull fracture. I noticed Rupert's mother standing in the doorway with hollow eyes, a ghostly figure. Her demeanor is calm, a resigned acceptance. It's clear she has been complicit in his crimes, whether out of love or fear. But I can't picture it. Can't imagine they could really do this. Her hands tremble slightly as she clutches the bottle of chloroform she'd used on me. "Did he say anything?" I manage to ask despite my shaky voice, my pulse racing again as I realize what they're going to do to me too. "Did he ask for my mom or dad? Or did you just choke out any cry for help that he had, while he tried to gain control? Did he stare at you, scared and helpless, confused at what was happening, betrayed by his best friend?" This is the first time I see any sense of regret in Rupert. fragment of dissatisfaction, and I suppose, disbelief. He is so far gone that he doesn't even know what it means, that he was Gavin's best friend among the selected few. I can't believe I haven't noticed it until now. The lack of depth in his emotions, the extent of his mischievous nature. It feels like I have eels churning in my stomach. He screamed your name once, before I had a strong grip on him. I guess the storm swallowed it, or you had walked far enough away since you didn't hear him. A sudden burst of rage pulses through my veins. I lunge at him, unable to harm him with my hands tied to the bedside. I keep trying, lunging, expecting the rope to snap from the pure hunger inside me, determined to destroy his conniving face. It's funny that if you hadn't entertained that man in the car, he would have caught me red-handed and saved your brother. His eyes are cold, and I imagine plowing my fingers into them, ripping them out. My boy, Martha says from the doorway in a fragile whimper. Please, don't hurt him. Don't torture him. Just, please. She turns around looking in distress, hands covering her mouth as she exits. I told the man when he stopped by, Rupert continues, that Gavin slipped on the ice and hurt himself. That it was really bad, he was dead already, and I needed him to drive me to my mom immediately down the road. So he did. Then I told my mom what I had done, and we made a plan to cover it up quickly. Scoop him up from the ground, bring him back into the basement. My mom told the stranger that she had called for emergency services and got his contact. Later that night, she drove up to his cabin and told him to shut up. That loony didn't need much convincing, just being told that if he ever stepped forward, charges would be pressed against him for hurting Gavin. Then, of course, he kept himself isolated for quite a while, hiding from the authorities because of your drawings of him, and I had to fit my narrative within that story. And you still do this? I ask, my muscles aching and tiring. Sometimes I get by on digging up fresh graves, stealing the bodies. It's been discovered a few times, as you saw in the newspapers, but I like my artwork with the skins. Keeps my hands busy. He strokes my face, my sweat dripping on his fingers. I've always wanted to see what it's like to be with someone alive. Naha, I let out. My heart races as I feign compliance, my mind racing for any possible escape. You have to let me live then, I say, my voice low and pleading, or I'll make it a miserable experience for you. If you hurt me, I'll bite, and if you don't, I'll give you whatever you want. That's how I want it. I'll bite, he whispers in a raw and raunchy tone, pressing his thumbs against my throat. I gulp, my skin tingling like needle sticks. I'll fight all night long. Fuck it then. I'll give you a fight, if you let me live. I stare straight into his eyes, pleading, or I'll make sure to give you no reaction at all. More than half my life without my brother? You think I can't be stoic? I can be as good as dead, and that's not how you want me. The sound of myself begging for my life is sickening, but I have to make it long enough to find a way out. In a twisted mockery of intimacy, his lips reach out for mine, cold and unfeeling. Amidst his tongue stroking my lips, I act. My teeth sink into his chin, tearing flesh and sinew with a savage bite. His surprised gasp is drowned out by my sudden burst of strength as I bite down again, ripping his chin off and spitting it out. No longer concerned with my well-being, but focused purely on survival, I slam my hand against the firm bedside with a sickening crack, snapping my wrist and fingers to free myself from the rope. I fumble for the pocket knife hidden in my sock. With a desperate, frenzied motion, I yank the knife out and thrust it into Rupert's throat. His face colorless from shock. Blood sprays, warm and wet, as I stab him repeatedly. His screams are choked and guttural, an erratic symphony of agony. The knife becomes an extension of my will to live and avenge my brother, each stab releasing years of suffering in vivid shades of red. I cut through the ropes, binding my other hand, my skin slick with Rupert's blood. My escape is urgent, the walls of the basement closing in on me, as the final threads of my freedom are within reach. I'm halfway free when the door swings open with a terrifying screech. Martha stands there, her face a mask of utter shock and terror as she clutches a longer kitchen knife. Her scream echoes through the basement, a primal cry of panic. Her eyes dart around the room, filled with a wild, unhinged desperation. I attempt to push past her, but she lunges forward and swings the knife, slicing my shoulder. A wet, open sensation spreads. I scramble, my movements agitated as I evade another attack. She stabs me straight in the abdomen. Kitchen knife is stuck. I fall, my head slamming against the concrete floor, my vision darkening. You don't mess with a mother. You don't mess with a mother's son. I'm going to die now. A noise erupts from the front door, just loud enough for me to hear. It buys me precious last seconds. I can feel life seeping out of me. The doorbell rings, a sharp, insistent sound that breaks the momentary chaos. I try to focus on it, imagining myself being saved by some God-sent person. Gavin. It's Gavin. Martha runs down to me frantically, forcing the fabric of the pillowcase, now stained with Rupert's blood, into my mouth, muffling my cries. I feel the rope tighten around my broken wrist once more as she restrains me. She leaves the basement, hurrying to answer the door, leaving me to fend for myself. But through the suffocating haze, I recognize a muffled, familiar voice. Lead investigator. Hope surges through me, but a part of me feels this must be a hallucination. Dying wish. I fight against the restraints, using every ounce of strength to dislodge the pillowcase from my mouth. With a final desperate scream, I manage to call out, "Help! Help! I'm here!" The investigator's voice stops abruptly. I sense a commotion happening upstairs. Before I know it, he bursts into the basement, his eyes scanning the scene with grim determination. The confrontation is swift. Rupert's mother is restrained, and he holds his shirt around the knife wound to stop my bleeding. Rupert's lifeless body lies sprawled on the floor. As the police and ambulance arrive and the scene is secured, I am freed and taken care of. The adrenaline that fueled my fight-or-flight response begins to ebb, leaving me weak and disoriented. But something else keeps me going. I am clinging to my will to live, tell the story of what happened in my own words. The thought of seeing my mom and dad again, making sure they don't lose another son, making sure they know what happened to their lost one, keeps me alive. In the end, I wake up in the hospital dressed in white, my parents by my side. I feel groggy and weak, but I can recover. The lead investigator explains that his decision to go to Rupert's house was guided by a mix of intuition and a lingering suspicion. I hadn't been present at my vacation home after our cryptic, promising arrangement, so he drove by the large, old-fashioned residence. Seeing my car parked outside and piecing together the evidence led him to check in on the situation. My luck hasn't run deep throughout the course of my life, but that day saved me. Several cases have finally been closed, and Martha is facing life in prison. What's left of it anyway? I'm not sure how that makes me feel, other than realizing that Rupert was not the childhood friend I thought he was, and she is not the mom I remembered. My parents find a semblance of peace as they can properly mourn the loss of Gavin. For me, the battle is far from over. The others don't have to live in that basement, witness the atrocities committed, but I do. It's imprinted on my soul, tattoo behind my eyes. Nightmares persist, and the guilt remains a constant companion. He screamed your name once. It's funny that if you hadn't entertained that man in the car, he would have caught me red-handed and saved your brother. I've learned that the most important thing in life is keeping your composure. Breathe through your teeth when you're in agony. Stay around your friends and family, even when you are reminded of humanity's worst, because with them you are safe, and pursue serenity in whatever form it presents itself to you. For me, it's a mundane but peaceful life with a wife and a son. As I watch my son play in the snow, his resemblance to Gavin strikes me every time. The small curls on his head, bright smile that reaches all the way up to his kind eye. Sometimes he asks me why I hesitate to let him go out and play with his friends, especially after dark and during harsher weather conditions. I tell him that it's a story that, like the brave scars on my shoulder and belly, can wait for another day. Because one day, he will be old enough to discover the stories about his uncle, and I don't know that I can face it just yet. Face that talk, which will end his age of innocence. So for now, I put his red coat on him and button it up, letting him wander off into the shiny snow with his friends. The darkness of the past may have carved out a significant part of my heart. It may ache, knowing that some faces go missing, and even if they're found, they're still lost. But if anything keeps me composed, it is the small figure that resembles my little brother. The love for my son warms me in this eternal snowstorm, delicate blanket in the winter's grip. As the last story's whispers fade, Another dark secret is about to be revealed. One rainy night. It was raining cats and dogs. I was still halfway from my home city. The business meeting took much longer than expected. I always had a problem driving after sunset. Somehow, my eyesight failed after the sun went down, and the rain that day made it worse. Thankfully, the highway was empty, except for a car or two every few minutes. Generally, I refrained from driving in the dark, but that night, I had no choice. Raindrops clashed hard against the windscreen as milestones flashed by the windows. I just wanted to reach my home as soon as possible. My heart was aching for a glass of scotch. As I drowned further in my thoughts, I thought I saw a silhouette on the side of the road. As I slowed down, the figure became clearer. It was a man, holding a large umbrella over his head, his other arm extended asking for a lift. I was apprehensive at first. A stranger could be a thief or a kidnapper or a murderer. But then my charitable side took over. I stopped the car and rolled down my window. The man leaned on the door, the umbrella covering his head and his back. I am extremely sorry for the inconvenience. My car broke down, and I can't get a mechanic in this weather. It would be very kind of you if you could drop me at my home. It's not far from here, he said in a gravelly voice. Yes, of course. It's raining like hell. Please get inside. I took a good look at him as he walked towards the passenger side of my car. He was tall, must have been more than 6 feet in height, wearing a two-piece suit. As he got inside, I could see he was completely drenched. Hello, I am Suresh. Thank you for giving the lift. I was standing there for half an hour and not one car stopped, he said, extending his hand. Can't really blame them, can we? Too many unscrupulous elements around. I am Abhishek, by the way, I said, shaking his hand. His hand was colder than expected. The rain suddenly increased in intensity as he sat in the passenger seat. I started the car and drove off. The rain increased continuously till a point that I couldn't see the road anymore. The stranger beside me was visibly worried. Would you be able to drive to your home in this weather? He asked. I have to. I have an important meeting tomorrow morning. Safety is foremost, isn't it? Why don't you spend the night at my place and leave early morning directly for your meeting? No, I can't do that, I said. I won't like to burden you. Come on, it's no burden. I live alone. I'd prefer the company. You seem to be a nice guy. I contemplated. It was raining heavily, and I could feel the tires of my car skidding from time to time. It was better to stay the night and start as soon as the rain stopped. All right, I think it's better to heed your advice. Let's reach your place as soon as possible. The following journey was uneventful. Breeze on the sides of the road passed on like a blur. The downpour drowned the sound of the car engine. Around 20 minutes later, Suresh asked me to take a right onto a smaller road. A large signboard read Nagar Haveli, 100 meters ahead. I asked, whose mansion is that? The name sounds very old. It's my ancestral home. We have been staying there for generations. My parents would have been glad to see you, but unfortunately they are on an Europe tour. That's absolutely fine. It's more than enough that you have invited me in this weather. A big mansion rose over the horizon as I drove ahead. It was more of a palace than a mansion. Golden domes rose into the sky, reminiscent of an era of kings and queens. The rest of the palace was adorned in white, oozing a massive status symbol. I wondered, how can a man stay alone in this huge place? As we reached the gate, Suresh excused himself and got out of the car. He went to the left side of the gate and punched in the security code. The gates opened, and I crossed the gates and stopped for Suresh. He walked in and got into the car. The gates closed after him. I drove slowly through the cobblestone path into a well-lit porch. The whole place was well maintained. Topiaries were on both sides of the path, with adjacent gardens. Everything was neat and orderly. I envied Suresh's life. Suresh asked me to park the car in the porch itself, as he wasn't expecting any visitors for the evening. I got out of the car and walked towards the massive front door. Craftsmanship on the door spoke volumes about the rich heritage. I couldn't help but get amazed at every bit of design on the walls. I followed Suresh through the main door and entered into their large drawing room. I was stupefied. It was a massive monumental room, with a white couch and claret armchairs matching the walls. A large mahogany table stood between the couch and the chairs, whose other end faced a fireplace. Dark charcoal marble floors complemented the design of the room. Large portraits of Suresh's ancestors hung on the walls. At the other end of the room, a large staircase led to the first floor. Just below the staircase was the liquor cabinet on one side, and on the other a showcase adorned with showpieces and various trophies. Suresh beckoned me towards the couch. "I'll be back after putting on something dry. Please have a seat." And he climbed up the stairs. I walked towards one of the chairs and sat down. I was busy checking emails on my phone when Suresh came down, dressed in pajamas and a nightgown. "Would you like some scotch?" I was delighted to hear those words. "Yes, I'd love some." He took out 2 glasses from the liquor cabinet and a half-filled glass bottle. He put down the glasses on the table and poured the drink till both the glasses were half full. He sat down with his glass in his hand. I took my glass and said, "Cheers." "I never expected this night to turn out this way," I said. "Me neither, but I am glad to have the company. Staying alone in this big house is quite boring." "Yes, I can understand." "So, where do you work?" "I own a small marketing company. We handle publicity and marketing for various consumer goods." "Wow, that's great. What were you doing here tonight?" "I was attending a meeting with a new client. I didn't expect it to take so long. To make matters worse, it started raining." "I can see. At least you didn't have to risk your life. How are you enjoying your drink?" "It's amazing. How old is it?" "I think around 20 years. Dad bought it last year." We had finished our first drink by then. Suresh poured another drink. I was intrigued about the past of Suresh's home, so I asked him about it. "This house is about 100 years old. My great-grandfather was very young when he started building this house. It was finally finished when my grandfather was a teenager." "Your house seems to have a rich heritage. Was your great-grandfather a zamindar or something?" "Yes, he was, and unlike most zamindars of that time, he was kind-hearted, though there was one incident because of which he was murdered in the end." "What? He was murdered? By whom, and why?" "Even though he was kind-hearted, he had a bad temper," he said slowly. "One day, he had gone to a nearby village to collect taxes. There he found out that one of the villagers was stealing grains from others and was selling them on the black market. He lost it completely. He ordered that man to be brought in front of him and had him beaten to death." "Okay, that's gruesome. What happened after that?" "The incident didn't sit well with the accomplices of the dead thief. They were hardcore criminals. One night, my great-grandfather was alone in the mansion. Everyone else had gone to a fair in the largest village in this area, the city you had your meeting today. Seeing the opportunity, those people attacked the mansion. They robbed as much as they could and murdered my great-grandfather when he tried to resist them. When everybody came back, nobody could find his dead body. Blood was everywhere, strewn about objects, told the whole story. His body hasn't been found till date. That's horrific. How did your family deal with it after that?" "My grandfather was old enough by that time. He held the helm of the affairs. In time, he also tracked down the assailants' whereabouts, but they were already dead. Rumors said that all of them died under mysterious circumstances." "Wow, it sounds like some ghost story. Was your great-grandfather somehow connected to it?" I asked jokingly. Suresh's face was serious now. "We don't joke about these things here. We have felt an unknown presence from time to time. I am not comfortable talking about it." "I am extremely sorry, but you are telling me that the mansion is haunted?" "Kind of. We don't poke at it. Certain incidents happen, but we don't prod. I think it's late enough. Let's have our dinner and go to sleep." "Yes, of course." Saying that, we finished our drinks and went to the dining hall. Needless to say, it was another marvel to look at. The dining table had a marble top with 10 chairs around it, each made of mahogany. Food was already kept on the table. The cook had left long ago. We served the food in our plates and heated on the microwave oven. Suresh was silent whole of the time. I decided to let him be. We had our dinner with minimal conversation. After dinner, we went upstairs, which housed all the bedrooms and a few other rooms. The bedrooms were adjacent to each other along a carpeted passage. Suresh showed me to the guest bedroom, which was at the end of the passage. Facing the room was a study. Suresh's room was 2 doors down along the same passage. The guest room was lavish, with a 4-poster king-size bed at the center. The whole floor was covered with a thick carpet. The bed was accompanied by 2 side tables with table lamps on top of them. Just beside the door was an almirah, and on the other side an attached bathroom. A large French window faced the door, covered with handmade curtains. I was too tired to move anymore. Before leaving for the night, Suresh said something that sent a chill down my spine. Whatever happens, don't get out of your room in the night. You might hear weird sounds or something similar. Just stay in your room. Don't ask why. Okay. It's eerie, but okay. I went to my bed, took off my shirt and trousers, and went off to sleep. It was still raining hard outside. Must have been around 3 a.m. that I heard loud raps on the bedroom door. It took me a moment to regain my senses. The knocking continued. While saying, "I am coming," in a loud voice, I got down from my bed. I switched on the bed lamp and walked up to the door, still groggy. The knocking continued. I assumed it must be Suresh in some kind of emergency. I opened the door and there was nobody. Something cold brushed past my face and suddenly I was freezing. I closed the door in a hurry and sat down on the floor. I was trembling with cold and fear. Suddenly, the door started banging loudly. I crawled back to the foot of the bed. I could feel hairs on my neck standing up. Cold sweat broke across my face. The banging stopped all of a sudden. I was hoping for Suresh to come my rescue, but he was nowhere to be seen. I decided to go to his room. I had completely forgotten what he had said before going to sleep. I stepped out of my room slowly. I looked at both sides of the door. A strange darkness shrouded the passage. I switched on the flashlight of my cell phone and tiptoed to Suresh's room. His door was wide open. I was taken aback. He was supposed to be in his room. I went inside. His bed was empty, blankets strewn aside as if he had just left his bed. I checked his washroom, which again was empty. Branches of a tree were banging against his bedroom window, creating a ghostly atmosphere. I strode out of the room and went downstairs. The sight shocked me. The main door was ajar. The whole house was covered in the same darkness. I went outside. Rain stormed like mad, accompanied by lightning every now and then. I stood in the porch for a while trying to find Suresh, but he was nowhere to be seen. I was worried if something happened to him. I went to my car and opened its trunk. I took out the tire iron, closed the trunk, and went beyond the porch towards the main gate. Another lightning cracked, followed by thunder. Everything was illuminated for a fraction of a second. I saw a dark figure near the gate. Must be Suresh. I ran ahead, but by the time I reached the gate, the figure was gone. Another lightning. I saw the figure walk towards the garden. I ran behind it. Another lightning. Figure disappeared, but I saw Suresh, in his nightgown, completely drenched, standing with a shovel in his hand near a freshly dug ditch. "Suresh, what are you doing here in the rain?" "Abhishek, do you know who my great-grandfather really was? He was a bloodthirsty monster. He killed people for fun. Kind-hearted nature was just a facade. He even killed his son's wife, my own grandmother, when she was pregnant for the second time." "What the hell are you talking about?" "Yes, that's my great-grandfather, and guess what? His blood runs in my veins. You shouldn't have given me the lift," and he stepped forward to strike me with the shovel. I couldn't step back in time, and the shovel passed through me. I smiled at him. All blood was drained from his face. He stepped back in shock. I was still smiling at him. He stuttered, What the hell are you? You don't need to know anymore." And I hit his head with my tire iron. His skull cracked with a loud sound, and he fell in the ditch he dug up. Rain had slowed down by then. It was time for sunrise, and that meant my time was almost up. The shadows have more to share. Dare you listen to what comes next? I just had a really peculiar guest on my podcast, but I don't think I can use the footage. I received a letter in the mail the other day from a man asking to be on my podcast. I thought this was strange, because seldom do the things I do in the digital world bleed over to reality. But he stated he was an older gentleman and it was easier for him to communicate this way. He informed me that he was a writer and promised to be a compelling guest on my show. It should be noted that I am by no means a celebrity. My podcast has very few viewers. I just talk to people in my community who seem interesting, and it's been a fun, although unrewarding hobby. I will sometimes go live on the internet for the show, and there is always one anonymous viewer in the chat. But that's okay. Needless to say, I replied to the man with a short letter of my own, telling him that it would be fun to have him on the show. Through smaller correspondence, I gave him my address and set a meeting time for a few weeks out. I anxiously awaited the day because I suppose there was some fear over meeting a person you've only written a letter to. When the day finally came, the man rang my doorbell at precisely the time we had agreed to meet. I peeked out the window, did not see a car in the driveway. Curious fact considering the rural nature of my location. I opened the door and extended my hand. "You must be Mr. Lydon. Pleasure to meet you." "And you as well." He was well over twice my age and looked just slightly older than my father. His hair was silver and he wore Coke bottle glasses. He also wore a brown suit and tie, but despite this, still looked casual in his attire. "Please, tell me you didn't walk all this way?" I asked, gesturing for him to enter the threshold of my home. He removed his cap. It was really no trouble at all. I offered him a drink before explaining to him how the recording process was going to work. But I assured him it was simple. I led him to my garage, where I kept my recording equipment. You see, it's kinda like having your own broadcast studio in your home. I got the camera and the microphone. All we have to do is sit in front of the lights and talk, and it will stream live on the internet. He seemed fascinated by it all, and I was glad because I put a lot of time and effort making my basement look like a late-night talk show of sorts. We sat in two identical chairs that faced each other, and I began the live feed. "Hey guys, welcome back to the show. Mr. Anonymous, good to see you in the chat as usual," I said. He had never replied to my greetings, but I still felt that he watched my broadcast intently. I was never sure why, but having at least one viewer made it feel like I wasn't just doing this all for nothing and talking into the void that is the internet. Today, I am with Mr. Lydon, who is an author in my local area. We've been talking via mail to set up this interview, and that's been a fascinating journey back in time, let me tell you. Anyway, Mr. Lydon, if you'd like to introduce yourself. Of course, as you mentioned, I am Mr. Lydon, a writer, a veteran, and a loving father. Now, one thing I've learned about doing a good interview is that you let your guests talk. You have to let them be the star of the show, and Mr. Lydon was easily one of the most fascinating people I had spoken to. He told me, and my one anonymous viewer, his life story. He was a steel mill worker before he got shipped off to Vietnam, where an infected wound cost him his leg, making his walk to my home even more impressive. When I asked him to talk about his literary work, though, he became somewhat agitated and shifted in his chair. He paused to think. "I have some short stories that were published long ago, mostly in magazines, all of which are probably out of print by now." "And what was that like, that experience? Do they still print magazines anymore?" "It was empty," he said. "I wrote countless stories. That's how I spent my time. That was my craft. That was the love of my life, telling stories to no one." I found his statement to be relatable, as I often feel like I too am doing the same thing. He went on, "But what all my stories share in common, other than the fact that no one read them," he laughed, "is what they don't say." I raised my eyebrow. "None of them say, 'I love you, son,'" he said. If I could have raised my eyebrow any higher, I would have. I've spent many years wondering what sense there was in yammering on in my fantasy worlds, using words to eloquently express my passing fascination with wizards and dragons, if I never moved them to leave a trail, if I never hid between every word a simple message that meant, "I love you." By now, I had noticed that he was speaking of his writing in a past tense, implying it was something he no longer does. I feared perhaps he was alluding to the possibility that his son had passed on, and that it was too late to use his writing as a way to express his love for him. But I had to ask, is it too late to write such a story? "With your help? Perhaps not," he replied. He promptly stood and shook my hand and thanked me for my time. He tipped his hat to me and said goodbye. Then he declined the offer for a ride home. I watched him walk out of the driveway and disappear into the night. I worried for his safety and asked him to write to me again sometime. When I closed the door, I immediately returned to my computer to watch the video back to myself. But before I closed the feed out, I noticed there was a message from my anonymous viewer. It simply said, "Thank you." He was out of the chat already, but I still responded to his message. It was when I played the recording back of the interview, though, that I understood. We must have spoken for at least 45 minutes. And of all that video, there was nothing more than a recording of me talking to myself. From one horror to the next, darkness deepens. Brace yourself. Apartment 74. Today, I'm moving into a student residence. For the first time, I'm leaving my family home. The thought fills me with both excitement and a touch of nervousness. My boyfriend came along to help me unpack. The apartment, located on the second floor, is small but functional. It offers me a first taste of independence. As we carry boxes, a strange smell catches our attention, seemingly drifting from the stairwell. We exchange a glance, but choose to ignore it, opting instead to take the elevator. As the days pass, something keeps me from settling into this new space. Despite my boyfriend's reassuring presence, the apartment remains oddly cold, impersonal. Nights are especially unsettling. Strange noises echo from the floor above, a low rumble, sometimes the creak of wood. We dismiss it, attributing it to the old building's quirks. Then one night, while we're comfortably settled on the couch, watching my boyfriend's favorite movie, Forrest Gump, my phone vibrates. A message appears on the screen from an unknown number. Leave apartment 74. A frown. I live in apartment 47. Assuming it's just a mistake, I decide to ignore the message and keep it from my boyfriend. But as the night wears on, the noises from above grow more persistent, almost invasive. There's banging against the walls, the scraping of furniture being dragged across the floor. Each sound draws nearer, becoming more intense, until it's almost unbearable. Finally, on edge, I suggest we go check it out. My boyfriend nods, equally disturbed by the relentless noise. When we step out, we find that the elevator we used earlier is now out of order. A sense of unease washes over me. We have no choice but to take the stairs. The strange odor we noticed during the move still lingers, now stronger and more nauseating. As we ascend, the noises abruptly stop, leaving us in an oppressive silence. We pass a few older residents who seem curious about our presence. When I ask if these sounds are common, they shake their heads, puzzled. They vaguely mention that previous tenants had also complained about noises from apartment 74. My stomach tightens. The memory of the anonymous message resurfaces, sending a cold shiver down my spine. My boyfriend, sensing my discomfort, suggests we go back. Once inside our apartment, I give in and show him the message. He reads it, his brow furrowed, but before he can respond, my phone vibrates again. Another notification. I'm watching you. My breath catches. Who could be sending these messages? A bad prank? Maybe. My boyfriend tries to calm me, but I can see the uncertainty in his eyes. He suggests we go to apartment 74 in the morning to clear things up. We attempt to resume the movie, but the noises return, more aggressive this time. As if something is desperately trying to break through the ceiling. My anxiety spikes, my body tense with fear. My boyfriend pulls me close, promising to check on the noise. I refuse to let him go alone. Hand in hand, we head for the stairs leading to the floor above. The smell now is nearly unbearable, a rancid, damp stench that seems to seep from the walls themselves. Each step brings us closer to something undefined, something we dread to discover. Halfway up, my phone vibrates again. Go back down. The message is simple, yet it chills me to the core. I stop, my heart pounding in my chest. We exchange a look, unsure. My boyfriend tries to reassure me, but I can see the worry etched on his face. We move forward regardless, each step echoing in the heavy silence of the building. When we reach the door of apartment 74, we notice it's slightly ajar. Faint, flickering light escapes from inside, casting strange shadows on the hallway floor. My boyfriend raises his hand to knock, but I instinctively hold him back. My heart races, and I suggest we wait, think it through. He shakes his head, determined to go in. The door creaks as it opens, the sound piercing the silence of the floor. Inside, the room is dimly lit, with the curtains drawn tight, blocking out nearly all light from outside. Only a computer screen glows faintly, casting an eerie light over the room. The place is in disarray, as if someone had ransacked it. We cautiously step inside, the heavy atmosphere pressing down on us. My boyfriend approaches the computer, drawn by the screen's glow. There's a video playing, he says, his voice tense. I move closer, feeling panic rise within me. On the screen, a black and white video shows our apartment. camera is pointed directly at our living room, capturing our every movement. For a moment, my heart stops. The scene is surreal, beyond comprehension. My boyfriend begins to speak, but his words fade as another message appears on my phone. You shouldn't have come here. The apartment door slams shut behind us with a loud bang, shattering the oppressive silence. We rush to the door, but it's locked. The handle refuses to turn, as if an invisible force is keeping us inside. Suddenly, slow, heavy footsteps echo in the hallway, drawing closer. Each step sounds nearer, more menacing. My boyfriend signals for me to find another way out. We frantically search the apartment, but the windows are sealed tight and no other exit is visible. Then a loud thud comes from the kitchen. We turn simultaneously toward the sound. On the counter, an unfamiliar cell phone vibrates, displaying one final message. Look behind you. The light suddenly goes out, plunging the apartment into total darkness. And in that blackness, a barely audible whisper reaches our ears. You won't leave here. The night has more to offer, and it's not done with you yet. The next story awaits. I got a migraine at work. Nothing has been the same since. You all right, May? Yeah, I think so. Pain stabbed me, like a knife was sunk deep into my brain. I told you you'd get a headache. Mary said, walking over to my desk. Go sit in the conference room, the dark will help. I'll get you some Advil. Thanks, I replied, removing my gloves and lab coat and heading over to the conference room. I felt dizzy. I held my right eye closed as I walked. Having it open wasn't helping. There was an undulating shape in the corner of my vision, making it hard to see and causing that sharp pain in my head. I got to the conference room and sat down in one of the leather chairs. What the hell was it called again? We were just talking about it during break. Those ocular migraines suck, huh? Mary walked in, a cup of water in one hand and pills in the other. I get them from time to time. Must be from looking at that computer screen for so long. I took the pills and chased them down with the water. Yeah, replied. I've only had this happen once or twice to me before. I never got to the headache part, though. I'd usually just lay down for 20 minutes and be fine. Might be you're just getting older. Mary chuckled. Things like this happen more as you age. You know how bad my knees are. She smiled at me. Take as long as you need, kid. I can send someone to cover you. I nodded and mumbled a thank you as I held my eyes shut. Having them closed helped a lot. She was right about getting older. I had started to find white hairs in the morning, not even gray, just full-on white. Hell, I was only 25. Thought I'd have to wait longer for that. I opened my eyes. The ocular migraine was fading fast, at least. The large, pulsating shape that had taken over the right side of my vision was now nothing more than a small dot that faded more with each passing second. I got up and stretched before heading back into the lab. The bright fluorescent lights probably weren't helping. I made a mental note to look into blue light glasses, anything to prevent those migraines. I sat down at my desk and was getting ready to work again. I coughed. An explosion of eye floaters engulfed my vision. Squiggly little lines danced around for a moment. Floating all around Undertree, they began to dissipate a few moments later. Great. I remembered hearing somewhere that those get worse with age, too. I began to get back to work. Sessioning specimens was an easy job. It was just preparing specimens for the real lab work, mostly. It was something I could get stuck into if I wasn't careful. Something I may have already gotten trapped in. It wasn't exactly what I wanted to do with my life. It wasn't what I went to school for. There was still time, I thought. I could still do other stuff. How long had I been here? 2 years. I'd get out soon. I'd do something I really wanted to do. And that's when I noticed it. Right in the middle of my train of thought. One of those eye floaters I had was still there in the corner of my vision. Perfectly still. I found that very strange. I'd usually only catch them for a second, overlaid on my vision, fading as fast as they appeared and moving. I had never seen one stay in the same place for this long, or even stay around this long at all. How long had it been exactly? Was it there since I sat down and coughed? Even longer? Or had it just shown up now? I couldn't tell. I tried to focus on my work. I would just get through the shift and sleep it off. Sleep would work, right? It would reset my eyes or something. I didn't know. I just hoped. I tried to ignore it. I was able to, mostly, but it was always there, sitting in the corner of my vision. It was multiple lines squished together, 3 long floaters spread out and converged into a single one that tailed it off. It was always just there. I could swear that I saw it move when I had my focus off it. The entire shape didn't move, no, but a slight twitch of a tendril, maybe. I somehow finished my shift. Needless to say, it was extremely hard to get work done. But I somehow did it. Driving home was even worse. I had to use my full attention on the road. Had to ignore the microscopic movements the thing in the corner of my vision was performing. I knew it was moving when I wasn't focusing on it. I skipped dinner when I got home. I had lost my appetite anyway. I figured the darkness of my bedroom would help my eyes. Yes, they must just be overworked. Rest would do them good. I laid in bed and listened to some audio dramas on my phone until I felt tired enough to sleep. My sleep was restless. I stood in a wasteland, orange sand at my feet. A temple of unknowable design lay half sunken in the sand. A storm was brewing. Even in my dream state, I could feel the coarse sand whipped up by the wind cut into my skin. Perched on an eroded, sand-shredded mesa was what seemed to be a bird. It faced me and took to the air. It wasn't a bird. It was bird-like, sure, but as it got closer my mind started to scream. My dream self was paralyzed. Something about it was wrong. The beak too long. The face with only skin and feathers where eyes should have been, the talons that stretched and flexed in unnatural ways as it flew. It looked at me with its eyeless face as it flew towards me. It was still looking at me as it lifted its body up and aimed its talons at me, swooping in for the kill. I shot awake, drenched in sweat. My heart stopped. It was next to me. Working on pure adrenaline, I swung my arm and smashed it into the empty space on the bed next to me. I blinked in confusion. No, it wasn't next to me. It was that eye floater. The shape of it looked a lot like that bird's claw. I frowned. Floater was still there. Sleep didn't help. I called out of work that day and made a rush appointment with an eye doctor. I swore I could see that floater change as the day went on. I'd catch it twitching while I was making breakfast, growing while I drove to my appointment. It was when I was sitting in the eye doctor's waiting room that I realized it was getting clearer. I could make out detail in the transparent shape now. Little horizontal lines going up and down the tendrils. It gained a color at the ends. Yellow, like a bird's talon. Couldn't be. That was a dream. The thing couldn't come out of my dream. That didn't make sense. And yet, the sinking feeling in my gut began to grow. The doctor found nothing physically wrong with my eyes. She strongly suggested that I go to a hospital, that this could indicate a problem with my brain. I thanked her. It was a good idea. I drove to the emergency room and explained my issues. The weeks of bills would be a pain to deal with, but it would be worth it to get this thing out of my vision. It was about an hour till they were ready for me. They wheeled me down to the imaging lab, to a room with a big machine. They had me close my eyes as I went in. I was back in the wasteland. Same location, same mesa ahead of me, same bird. The scene repeated. Looked at me without eyes and took flight. There was a horrible screeching as it flew, tearing in the air, nails on chalkboard. It got into its hunting position as it swooped down. The vision didn't end. That horrible talon pierced me. It went straight through my eye. I could feel it, working its way deeper, grabbing onto my brain, squeezing. I woke. I was back. Not in the imaging room, but in a hospital room. A nurse came in. She said I must have been exhausted, that I fell asleep during the scan. I'd get the results soon, but the doctors were already recommending I stay overnight. You could never be too careful with the brain, after all. I was terrified. I could still feel it, still feel that thing's talons grasped around my brain. With each stab of pain in my head, my vision would explode. Large masses would appear and fade within seconds, undulating while light would blind me. But the worst was that eye floater. It was still there, in the same position as always. What was more clear now was that thing's talon, exactly like the dream, and now there was a blurry mass behind. I'm still terrified. That thing gets closer, clearer as I sleep. There's no way I'd be able to avoid sleep here. Hospital would make sure that I got my rest. I don't know why this is happening to me. The worst part is I don't know how to stop it. It'll catch up to me eventually. All it needs is time. One tale may be over, but the horrors are far from done. Let's dive deeper into the abyss. I was tasked with babysitting for my neighbor's kid. but she has sent me an extremely weird message on WhatsApp. Please feed Mohan his dog food, pedigree, at 2 p.m. The packet is in the cupboard, and his dog bowl is kept near the kitchen sink. I stared at the WhatsApp message, reading it again and again. My emotions were caught between bemusement and nervousness at the bizarre request. I know what you all are thinking. Just feed the damn dog his kibble. But here are the facts. Mohan is not a dog. He is a 10-year-old. Give you all some context upon my situation. I had agreed to babysit Mrs. Mistre, Sharma's son Mohan, because my mother wanted our new kooky neighbor to feel at home. And no, this was not a paid babysitting job. It was just an endeavor to build neighborly relations by my over-enthusiastic mother. But as I said just now, Mrs. Sharma was a kooky. I had only observed her twice. Both the moments left quite an impression upon me. The first one happened when I caught her cutting a bar of soap like a carrot on my mother's chopping board. She had brought a pack of those as gifts when she first came to visit us. A brand new pack of expensive sandal soaps. At that time, I was reading a book from a position where she could not see me, but I could see her on the sofa, chatting with my mother. But when my mother went to the terrace to fetch our drying clothes for 10 minutes, I surreptitiously watched her take one of the bars and start dicing it upon the chopping board my mother had just used for slicing radishes. I looked away after 5 minutes, but Mrs. Sharma had clearly left no trace of her actions, because when my mother came back, they continued their nonsensical conversations, while my mother once again picked up her knife and continued chopping the remaining vegetables. Needless to say, I refused to eat dinner that night and ordered from Zomato. The second incident happened when I caught Mrs. Sharma tasting pedigree, popular brand of dog food, when my mother and I were visiting her home. Mrs. Sharma went into her kitchen to make drinks and snacks for us while we were waiting in her guest room. At that time, I had a sudden urge to use the washroom. I silently walked past the kitchen, but my eyes happened to glance upon her for a few seconds. And there she was, taking kibbles out of a pedigree packet and putting them in her mouth. I refused to eat anything she served to me and my mom later on. I also mentally grimaced every time my mom picked a bite to eat. The woman clearly had issues, and I wished that my mom would have stayed clear of her. But fate had other plans. The two had become fast friends, and now I was saddled with babysitting Mrs. Sharma's 10-year-old son Mohan. When I had questioned my mother about why we didn't see Mohan during our visit to Mrs. Sharma's house, Mom told me that it was because he had gone on a walk with a girl from our colony. My mom also gave me a list of written instructions on how to take care of that kid. I wished she would just WhatsApp me, but she just had to write it on paper in her terrible handwriting. Honestly, the only redeeming quality of Mrs. Sharma so far was that she was not as technophobic as my mother and had agreed to message me the instructions. The babysitting ordeal was to last from 12 noon till 6 in the evening. I had not even glanced upon the list my mother had given me, as Mrs. Sharma had promised me that she would text me the relevant tasks throughout the day. So, with an irritated look upon my face, I went to pursue the challenge. I first saw Mohan in the living room of their house, watching television. An episode of Doraemon blared from the television, and I winced at how loud it was. The kid was unaffected. Mrs. Sharma had just deposited the keys to her house with me right outside the house and left in a hurry, without even introducing me to her kid. Her craziness clearly wasn't going away anytime soon. I felt sorry for the kid for having such a weird mother without even having met him. That is how I had relaxed a little and entered their living room after safely locking the door. I was told by my mother that Mohan was 10 years old. He looked exactly like a normal 10-year-old would. He was watching the television screen with his black hair combed back, wearing a red t-shirt and a pair of comfortable pants, munching upon Maggi noodles with a glass of mango juice nearby. I introduced myself to him and he monotonously replied to my basic questions, his attention clearly fixed upon the television. But he looked comfortable enough, so I went into the guest bedroom of the house to watch Dairy Girls on Netflix, after reassuring him to call me if he needs anything. I was captivated by the show until Mrs. Sharma's message notification came on WhatsApp. That is when the weird message that I had talked about earlier came in, at 1:40 p.m. And reading the message made me wish that there was some version of CPS in India, because the entire event just screamed that something abusive was going on with Mohan and his mother. I wondered if Mrs. Sharma was joking with me, so I nervously went to the cupboard to see if I would actually find dog food over there. I was hoping that the last time I saw her eat pedigree kibbles in her kitchen was just some hallucination or glitch in the Matrix moment. But there it was, a yellow packet with a cute little golden retriever picture. A big packet of pedigree. Stared at it for a good 10 minutes, wondering what my next steps should be. Should I make a run for it and inform my mother about the incident? Or should I grab Mohan along with me too? Or should I just ignore my conscience and feed him the dog food and finish my babysitting task? 'Cause if the past events were anything to go by, it certainly would not be the first time he would be eating it. My mind was racing in all directions until suddenly I heard scratching at one of the bedroom doors nearby. To say that my blood had turned to ice by now would be an understatement. I quickly ran to Mohan and asked him what was causing the scratching. Maybe it was just a pet that Mrs. Sharma had confused with Mohan, thought nervously, but Mohan's reply caught me off guard. "It is the red man," he told me. "What? Just ignore him and don't open that door." After giving that vague answer, he went back to watching some cartoon. I was beyond scared by this point and just wanted to bolt out of the house. But one question still lingered in my mind. "Does your mother feed you pedigree?" I asked him cautiously. Mohan looked at me for a few seconds and nodded yes. I sucked in a breath and hurriedly told him to come with me to my house. He had clearly been abused and was under some delusion of the red man. I could not in good conscience leave the kid here with that crazy witch. So I just grabbed his arm and started dragging him with me. I frantically reassured him that we would call the police on his mother and he would be safe from her, but he quietly told me that there was no point to that. That made me pause in my tracks. I looked over my shoulder to see that he had suddenly become hunched over and was shaking with tears. "That woman is not my mother. My mother was killed 2 years ago. The red man had killed her, and if you try to complain about it, it will kill you." "What the hell are you talking about?" I screamed at the kid, my mind spinning. "It is true. It used to be just me and my mom, the real Radhika Sharma. Used to be normal, but one weird rule existed in our house. Mom had forbidden me from going to the guest room of my house, claiming that a ghost lives there and we should be wary of him. I used to be extremely afraid of that threat because I could sometimes hear scratching sounds from behind that locked door. One night, when I went to get water, I saw her standing outside the door to that room with a very frightened look on her face. I saw it. A red hand had suddenly emerged from the door and grabbed her inside. I ran back to my room and hid under the covers the entire night. I was sobbing throughout the night and was terrified that my mother had been killed, terrified that the red man exists and that he would come after me. Never came out. The next day, my mother came to wake me up. I was scared but happy to see her. But that morning, for breakfast, she served me the pedigree that used to feed our dog at that time. Her eccentric behavior did not end there. She would always take baths with a mixture of milk and oil. She would sleep on the roof of our car with her eyes open. She would twist her neck at odd angles pretty often, and she would also cut up slices of soap to feed our dog. Our dog, he died soon because of that. I stared at Mohan with a numb feeling. Continued his rambles. I knew then that thing was not my mother. My mommy was dead. And I also knew that whatever that thing is, it was trying to imitate humans. It has gotten rather good at it over 2 years. We moved a lot during that time. It will always chat up the new neighbors, trying to appear more and more normal. I knew it was some weird creature. But I also knew that it was not the red man. Because no matter where we moved, there would always be one of our rooms that would be locked and off limits to me, and I could hear scratching behind it. He finally finished his story while sobbing throughout. I just kept on standing there, feeling like an icy hand had gripped my heart. I was not afraid for the kid. I knew he would survive somehow. I was afraid for myself, knowing that I had basically entered a haunted house. Mohan had escaped my grasp and ran upstairs, probably to cry to himself some more. But I knew that if I didn't get out of the house that second, my legs would give out, and I would not escape alive. I was about to make a run for it when I heard a tire screech in the background. Mrs. Sharma, or more pointedly, the thing imitating her, was home. I just stood there frozen like a statue when the lock turned. The thing must have had a spare key, of course, and within moments, it opened the door and entered the house with a cheery face. "Hello, dear. How was your day? I'm sorry I came home early. The grocery shop I like was closed today, and I was free to come home early. I hope you had fun with Mohan. He is very friendly." The thing grinned at me. I just stared in silence, not a movement out of me. It moved towards the room from where the scratching sounds were coming from, still chatting me up. I hope Mohan ate his food properly. He generally is a good boy, but I had to discipline him for a very long time for him to reach that stage when it comes to food. I watched in silent horror as it came to stand before the door with the scratching sounds, but a confused expression came upon his face. "Dearie, did you not let Mohan out of the room?" "Huh?" The inquisitive expression just escaped my mouth. First, prickle of curiosity coming over me. Without any warning, its hands turned the handle and opened the door. I screamed and tried to make a run for it, until I heard a bark from behind me. I just froze upon the spot, slowly turning my head around. I expected to see a grotesque red figure with a creepy smile coming at me with inhuman speed. Instead, a happy golden retriever ran up to me. I tried to collect my thoughts for a minute. I expected that this was all a show, and both the woman and dog would soon reveal their true paranormal forms. But nothing of that sort happened. Golden happily continued to hug me, and Mrs. Sharma watched with a worried look on her face. "Did you not feed him, dearie? Mohan must be very hungry now." Mrs. Sharma replied, pointing to the dog. "What are you talking about? Mohan is your son, isn't he?" "I refer to him as my son, but he is not my actual son, dearie. He is a dog. Why are you asking such a weird question?" "But, were you confused all this time because you thought I had an actual son? I never had a child, and I had never been married. I have only had one companion for 10 years, my beloved Mohan. Let me feed him now. He must be hungry." With that, she walked towards the kitchen. I just excused myself and ran to my home. I ambushed my mother as soon as I saw her. "Did you know that Mohan was a dog?" I angrily questioned my mother. "Of course. Why are you asking such an idiotic question? Was that not clear enough the first time you saw him? Mohan being a dog was literally the first thing I wrote in my list. You did not read it." My mother chided me. I was at a complete loss of words. If Mohan was a dog, then who the hell was the boy I had talked to? Wanting more answers, I started narrating Mrs. Sharma's past actions to my mother. I told her about Mrs. Sharma's weird soap chopping and pedigree eating behaviors from earlier. I expected her to be shocked at this, but she only laughed. She was chopping the soap because I had asked her to do that, silly. I had wanted to take those pieces of soap to keep them in our potted plants. I had read somewhere that they repel insects and wanted to check for myself. And as far as the pedigree eating is concerned, she did not eat it. She told me that she puts a few pieces in her mouth to encourage Mohan to eat it. She sometimes does it even when he is not there out of absent-mindedness. You may think it is weird, but the tactic has been quite effective so far. With that, my mother started walking towards the dining table, still speaking. "You have really disappointed me this time. I expected you would take better care of Mohan. You are lucky Mrs. Sharma is a sweet lady. She would probably forgive you. Sharma had even brought a gift for you for taking care of Mohan." My mother kept on ranting. My mother pointed towards a painting kept on the dining table. But as soon as I saw it, beads of sweat started collecting on my forehead, and I felt like I would faint. Because the painting consisted of a picture of the same boy I had talked to earlier that day, and on the bottom right corner was signed as the Red Man. Since then, I have tried to throw out the painting multiple times, but it keeps on showing up in weird places in my house. So all I am requesting you guys is that if you ever end up babysitting a kid talking about the Red Man, just call an exorcist.